Hello, and welcome back to Zenin Fanfics. Today we're starting part 4 of an exciting new series. What if Deku had blood manipulation quirk? If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe for more content. The story we're featuring is written by Judas Magnus 1994 on archiveofourown.org. You can find all the relevant links in the description, so be sure to check out the author's profile and say hello. Now let's dive into the story. In the airport of the Island, the murmurs about what happened the previous day when the villains attacked the celebratory party and how one of the scientists who were kidnapped by the villains was in fact in cahoots with them filled the air. Izuku and those who came from Japan were boarding the plane that would take them back to Japan. Izuku was a little sad to part ways with his dad again, but considering that now they would return to a home that had been devastated by the League of Villains, and they were going to be busy with the whole moving to another house, then Izuku and his mom would be busy enough to get sad. Izuku was now thinking back about the previous day and the two things that still lingered in his mind. The first one was that he was now able to put a face to the man who started it all, the first wielder of OFA, and the one that he was a descendant. Fixing Murio's quirk from the damage done to it by the quirk erasing bullets meant that he had to contact OFA again. But at least this time the attempt of OFA to connect with him was less aggressive as Izuku managed to enter the inner world inside OFA with minimal issue and aside from the man itself. He saw 6 more figures that represented the vestiges of those who in the past wielded OFA before All Might got its hands on it. Yuii Shigaraki was a frail-looking man with an iron will whose fate was marred by misfortune time and time again, and not even death let the man fully rest. The man at least was able to see that despite his short life, there was at least a part of himself still living in this world as Izuku, and his mom's existence was proof that he left a mark in this world. Yuichi tried to convince him to take a share of OFA's power just in case, but Izuku refused. He told him that he had more than enough, and that he really wanted to stick with his plan of being a doctor/quirk analyst first, and a hero second, and having a powerful quirk could make that difficult. Izuku told him that it was Murio's duty and responsibility to wield OFA's power correctly, and that while he would help him to take down AFO for the sake of the world if he had to, he had his own battles to fight as a hero, and those fights would require more than just raw power. Yuichi looked saddened at Izuku's words, but he respected his choice, and then Izuku managed to fully restore OFA's capabilities. Izuku was trying his best to stick to his determination of not taking quirk factors any time that his blood came in contact with something, but Izuku knew that his quirk's instinct sometimes was stronger than his own will. And while Izuku was thankful for having that sensory manipulation quirk that allowed him to trick Wolfram from a distance, so he missed his death blow to All Might by causing his mind to think that All Might was a couple of steps away from where he was, Izuku was ashamed in a way to admit that he was unable to fully control his quirk. He got that quirk the same day that Sir Nightai asked for him to try to discover what the quirk erasing bullets did to the genetic quirk factor of a person, and since he had to get closer and personal when using his quirk to analyze the blood, then he managed to acquire some of that genetic factor for himself, even if he didn't want it. Izuku knew that he should be that HRD on himself, but he wanted to avoid that side of him that Yuichi considered was what AFO felt when he saw a person's quirk, and that made him want that quirk for himself to get a foothold in his mind, and that meant that he had to be that HRD on himself to not slip up and fall on the same habits that turned AFO into the monster that he is today. The second thing was the fate of the Shield family after that day, and from what he heard from All Might, it appeared that they were going to go through a rough patch for a while. In the end, David Shield's involvement in the incident was obscured, and almost all the responsibility was directed to his assistant Samuel. Izuku could comment about the fact that they were using a scapegoat to keep David Shield's reputation intact, but since that assistant of his was one of the masterminds of this incident, then it wasn't that much of a scapegoat. David was going to step down from his job in a way after what happened in part, because he felt ashamed of what he did and how things went, and it was going to be Melissa the one that would continue his work when she finished her studies. Izuku talked to her in that room about his past, and what his quirk could do, and he decided to use quirk bestowal to give Melissa a quirk. He decided to give her one that would help her in her future endeavors, and considering that the original user of that quirk was a criminal who was involved with the whole case of quirk erasing bullets, then Izuku knew that Melissa Shield would be able to give a more heroic use to Overhaul that his wielder could ever do. Izuku was informed about the identity of the man who was the wielder of Overhaul, And that man was involved with the Yakuza clan that had recently started to get some notoriety after Sir Naitai's investigation from the Quirk erasing bullets tied them to those bullets thanks to Izuku's Quirk giving him that information about what that serum was about. That Yakuza family was the Shai Hasaikai, and their attempts to be under the radar now became more difficult after Sir Naitai warned the heroes of the area in which said Yakuza clan was located about their activities, and that meant that a lot of police raids were done in the area, and a lot of those bullets were now under police custody before the Yakuza managed to distribute them. Izuku hoped that after this international fiasco, things would relax a little, but as long as AFO was still active and scheming to destroy All Might, Izuku knew that any kind of peace would be a short reprieve until that villain was put down for good. As Izuku and his mom were now talking to a group of men in suits who were part of the WHA that worked in Japan after they left the airport after the plane landed on Japanese soil, so they could talk about their new accommodations. The news about the events of the island became somewhat public, and for the people of Mustafu, who were still sore after Bakugo's descent to villainy, put a lot of people who were in charge during Bakugo's formative years on the spot, as the responsibility for Bakugo's turn to villainy was now blamed on their lack of longing to DSPLN him, as they believed that his quirk was the only thing that mattered to be a hero, while missing the fact that if Bakugo was unable to understand how a hero should act, then he would make a poor hero. The teachers of Aldera, who were that quick to turn Izuku into the target of Bakugo's bullying, while they did their best to make Izuku miserable. Now they were seeing that Izuku was not only a hero now, but also gaining enough clout in the hero community if All Might's words of praise to his actions during the incident led to believe. Izuku now had the reputation that they wanted to exploit from Bakugo, but they knew that Izuku had nothing but contempt for their institution, and they knew that trying to lock on that success of his was a pointless endeavor, as people were seeing the recordings about how Bakugo acted inside their walls in those years, and there was no way to spin those recordings in a positive way. But they weren't the only ones that were lamenting their actions against Izuku in the past. His ex-classmates from Class 1, they were starting to get bitter over the fact that things were going badly for them since the moment that Izuku left them behind, while Izuku's situation was going better since he cut them off from his life. The whole hearing that he became a hero on his own while they were stuck with an incompetent homeroom teacher who didn't bother himself with helping them, while they saw how he was willing to help their now ex-classmate, who was his personal apprentice, while they were left on their own with little to no guidance aside from a cold and uncaring figure-it-out-yourselves from the man that now had not only his license as a hero suspended by the HPSC, but also was fired from UA. None of them was willing to give him a chance, and were quick to belittle him for being quirkless, and that in a way united the class in the first week. But when Izuku parted ways and did his own thing, then the whole class unit fell apart, as no one was there to try to unite them. And even if Eraserhead was now out of the way and a new teacher was going to take over as a homeroom teacher, there was barely any hope for Class 1A to bounce back from this situation. The summer training camp was now Nizu's last chance to try to find a way to solve the situation before he decided to give up and leave them to their own devices. But not even Nizu was sure that the summer camp would fix the problem that was caused by his decision to let Eraserhead from doing what he did without considering if what he did was the right thing to do or even morally right. So Wolfram failed, AFO said, as he heard the news about what happened on the day of the Igala. He felt almost robbed after hearing that. Wolfram talked big, but it appeared that he was all talk and no action. But this endeavor still gave him some insight about the next user of OFA, as the news mentioned Murio Togata as his apprentice and successor, and that put Murio in his crosshair. But then the name of that brat that became Tomura's bitter enemy after Bakugo revealed that it was Izuku, the one that saved the lives of those that Tomura left for death in the USJ incident, came also in the news as one of the heroes that had an important role in the resolution of the island incident, and AFO was starting to get a little bothered by it for some reason. That brat was starting to become a thorn in his side, and while his existence now became a target of obsession for Tomura to focus his anger, there was something in the back of his mind that bothered him about that brat. AFO put those tufts on the back of his mind, as he remembered what Kurojairi told him about how Tomura was faring with 2 quirks now, and it appeared that Tomura's fragile mental state wasn't taking Bakugo's quirk that well. The timetable had to be moved up a little, and after grafting a new arm that came from one Nomu so Tomura was able to use his quirk with his 2 hands, The doctor had decided to put the finishing touches to the body modifications that Tamura had undergone, so he could become a perfect vessel for AFO plans. But that process wasn't perfected enough by the looks of it, and it appeared that Tamura would need to receive some extra modifications at a later date to become a perfect vessel. At the same time, Oife was thinking about how the Nomu that was created from Bakugo's body was quite peculiar. That Nomu had a small sense of self, and was quite a destructive force thanks to the modified quirks that were implanted in him to turn him into a suicidal bomber that could regenerate from his own self-immolation as long as his brain was intact. But the problem was that he was constantly shouting one single thing when he was about to self-detonate, and AFO didn't know what that word meant. Deku. That annoying voice of that Nomu still echoed in his mind from time to time, even if AFO decided to keep that Nomu sealed until he needed to use it, and AFO decided that maybe it was time to give that Nomu its first real test on the summer camp that would happen soon enough. Izuku and his mom were now living in a gated community that, despite belonging to the WHA, it was still located in Mustafu. They lived now a couple of km away from their previous apartment, and while this new house was already furnished with furniture and all kinds of basic things, the sense of not being the same as their apartment still lingered on their minds. The first days were a little complicated, but they adapted to their new accommodations. Izuku had to buy a new PC for personal use, and decided to indulge himself a little by buying a gaming PC alongside an expensive TV to use as a screen and other things. Izuku was not into video games, as his obsession with quirk analysis and heroics took a lot of his free time as a kid, and he doubled down with those two things as a way to cope with the bullying that he received as a kid. So maybe he could try to play a game or two now, but he would have to wait for that as he had to deal with his responsibilities as a part-time worker on the Idaten and a freelance hero on the side. Even if his freelancer work as a hero consisted of being an on-and-off sidekick for Ingenium or helping the victims of those quirk erasing bullets at Sir Nitai's request, it wasn't that much, but it was honest work. But this was going to be the beginning of his new life as a hero before he managed to get into a university and graduate as a quirk analyst and medical professional who could use his quirk to save lives aside from doing things the old-fashioned way. At least his hero suit was ready, and that meant that he would now be able to present himself as a more serious person when saying that he was a hero, as his hero suit was just a white suit, a green dress shirt, and a pair of black fancier sneakers to use as a footwear. Despite the simplicity of his attire as a hero, those pieces of clothes were specifically designed to be used for heroic activities like fighting villains and intensive exercise, among other things. Despite the formal and elegant look of those clothes, he was going to try it out now to see how he wore those things, just in case he needed to change his mind about his choice of attire before he decided to go to the Idaten today. You know what, Midoriya? I think that you have a hidden quirk that makes you able to find trouble almost everywhere you go, because it is too much of a casualty that something happens in the island, the safest place in the world, the moment that you step foot there. Ingenium said in a joking manner to Izuku after they both met again after Izuku returned from the island. The worst part of what you said is that I can see that happening, but no. I just have the worst and best luck at the same time. I just find trouble almost everywhere I go, but I can manage to get out of trouble unscathed, Izuku replied to the man. Izuku had decided to go to the Idaten agency in order to do his part as a part-time worker, and he found Ingenium in the reception room. Then I guess I can thank you back, Luck, for bringing us together. Izuku, Himiko said. She was also in the reception room, helping the receptionist with her duties as part of her part-time job duties. She had been learning the ropes about a lot of basic jobs, and she was almost catching up with her studies. Yeah, you could say that, but how things are going for you now? Izuku asked. Not bad at all. It's almost like I'm in a dream sometimes, Himiko said. For a long time ago, she had given up on having a normal life as people around her treated her like a monster, the kind of person that a hero would fight and detain, but there she was surrounded by heroes, but she was treated as a human being, and all thanks to Izuku, who, while he was equipped to deal with her blood-related issues, he made the active decision to help her even after all what she did. I'm glad to hear that, Izuku said. He looked at Himiko and saw that she was looking at him more intensely now that he was wearing his new hero suit for some reason, while blushing a little. I do as well. You have been making a lot of progress in your rehabilitation, but considering that you were afforded the means to properly deal with your quirk needs now, then something tells me that if your parents had bothered to even take a look, then none of this would have happened. Ingenium said. He had been watching over Himiko's progress since he decided to take her under his wing in order to get her into the villain rehabilitation program, and she had been one of the few villains in that program that had made the process far less complicated than it needed to be. But since not only her quirk needs were taken care of, but she wanted to do this, then maybe that was the secret of her actual success in her rehabilitation. Maybe, but that question is never going to be answered. I have to focus on my future, but what can I do after I am done with the villain rehabilitation program? Himiko asked. At the time, she was being given a job in the Idodin agency, a salary, and even though she was being helped to continue the education that she had left behind some years ago, Himiko wasn't sure about her future after that. Ingenium was willing to let her continue working in his agency as a full-time employee, but even if the pay was good, she really wanted to find something to do with her life for herself. Well, I do want to create a small clinic/hero agency for me to work at my own pace, and I think that I would need some people to help me with that. Izuku said. What do you have in mind? Himiko asked. I thought that it would be nice having someone like an assistant to help me with things like scheduling and setting up appointments with people, for example. I sort of starting to think about those details, but if you are interested, Izuku said. Sure, I would like to hear it. Himiko said. I am glad that you are making some progress with your future plan, Midoriya. But for the time being, we should focus on the task at hand. Some work needs to be done, and I would like to count on your support, Ingenium said. He felt a little sad that he was interrupting that conversation, but there was work to be done. Sorry about that, though. You want me as a part-time worker here, or as a hero? Izuku said, gelling a little ashamed, but he quickly regained his composure. As a hero. There had been a recent spike of villainy in a certain area in Japan, and that makes me feel some concern about my little brother, Ingenium said. Why is that? Izuku asked. I will explain everything along the way, but we need to get a move on into Nagano, Ingenium said. Izuku somewhat remembers hearing something about Nagano in the past, but he decided to push that for later, and after saying his goodbyes to Himiko, he followed the hero to Nagano as he was being told about a summer camp that was happening now and how he suspected that the League of Villains was involved in the spike of villainy on the area for some reason. This wasn't the first time that Kinoko Komori was in Beast Forest. In fact, she had been already there as part of her internship with the Pussycats after the sports festival, and she had learned a lot about rescue operations in the mountains and ways to get some mileage from her quirk to aid in rescue operations. The ability to create mushrooms anywhere where the spores that she created landed could be used to secure a source of food in a pinch in case the need to feed multiple people after a natural disaster arises, and she memorized quick and easy recipes about how to prepare some mushrooms for quick consumption. And even if her mushrooms disappeared after a certain time, if they were consumed minutes after their creation, then they would linger long enough to be digested. She had learned a lot from the Pussycats and even spent a couple of fun times with them during her internship with them, but then she met Koda, and then her time there was soured out a little. The kid was so bitter at the world despite being so young, and while she was reminded a little about Izuku's way of acting after the USJ, Koda was unable to let his frustrations and pain go away, and after he tried to hit her when she tried to be nice to her, she stayed away from the kid during her stay with the Pussycats. The trial of going from the bus stop through the forest to reach the Pussycats agency would be a daunting task, but Kinoko knew the way already, and she was able to guide her classmates to the camp while they fend off the earth creations of Pixie Bob along the way. They reached the camp fast enough to get dinner, and while they enjoyed their time in peace, they saw how the students of Class 1A were looking miserable. Kinoko had no relation at all with the students of Class 1A aside from Izuku, who quit the class after the first week, but she was able to see that almost all of them were miserable, and not even the change from homeroom teacher, who was now Midnight, was helping to steer the situation. The day after, that was the one that was dedicated to doing special exercises to strengthen their quirks, and the Pussycats were surprised to see that almost all the students of Class 1B already knew what to do to strengthen their quirks without their input. Well, it appears that some of you know already what to do, Tiger said, somewhat impressed with that display. To be fair, Midoriya did help us to figure out how to do that, Itsuka said. She was one of the few whom Izuku told that her quirk was already doing everything that it could do, and that there wasn't any hidden potential for her to awake. But Izuku's tips and recommended exercises made her quirk even stronger despite the lack of hidden potential. Midoriya sent that the friend of the general course that Komori talked about so much. Pixie Bob said, yeah, He's a little intimidating at first, but he does know his stuff about quirks. He almost knows more about the quirk of a person than the person himself. Setsuna Tokage said. She remembered when she decided to give it a chance to Izuku's offer, and he was able to take her quirk apart in front of her on that notebook that she gave to him faster that she could disassemble her own body with her quirk. That sound impressive, Mandalay said. The students of Class 1, they got somewhat bitter after hearing that Izuku was brought to the conversation, and the reminder that he managed to help their sister class with their quirks to the point that now they had almost all the protagonism was a bitter pill to swallow. But now they had to focus on the summer camp to see if this 1 week gave them what they needed. But none of them were holding their breath for a miracle for them after how things went in to pass the time to take a bath in the hot springs in the area came, and while the students of Class 1B wanted to relax a little after the day, it appeared that the presence of Class 1A in the camp was going to make things go badly in a way. I can't feel my everything, the voice of the class resident pervert Minoru Minetta echoed in the area, and then some students of Class 1B decided to check what had happened, and they were appalled. Minoru Minetta was lying on the ground near the wall that keeps the baths for males and females separated, his face covered in water while the sound of small droplets of blood surrounded his neck. What is going on? Tetsu said. He looked at one of the trees nearby and saw that the kid who had punched Minoma in the ball was glaring at the falling Minetta. That pervert had tried to climb the wall to take a peek at his female classmates. I stopped him, Kota said in an uncaring way. That made some of the boys look at Minetta, and they saw how he was getting more and more panicked as he was unable to move after the fall. We need to call our teacher. I am afraid that Minetta had suffered a neck injury as a result of the fall that had left him paralyzed. Jirota Shishida said, feeling a little sad to see Minetta like this. He may felt some contempt for his perversions and reprehensible actions towards his female classmates, but how now he was on the verge of a panic attack after losing his mobility was something that not even he could think that Minetta deserved. Vlad King and Tiger came after a while, and then after taking him to his bed to let him in a safe place, they needed to decide what to do. It was clear that what Kota did was out of line, and even if the girls of 1A felt no pity for him, as he had been constantly acting like a pervert in reprehensible ways in class because Eraserhead refused to step up, what had happened to him was a cruel punishment. The camp was going to continue anyway, but they needed to find a way to fix Minetta's injuries. But the closest hero hospital was almost 3 hours from here, and they were somewhat concerned about the sudden spike of villainy in the area. While the teachers of UA were considering their options, Mandalay decided to connect to the hero network to see if there was a hero with a healing quirk nearby, and it appears that luck was on their side. I think that there is something that we can do, but we are going to have to call for a hero who is now in the area with a healing quirk, Mandalay said, and then she showed both Vlad King and Midnight the hero that she was talking about, and both were shocked. They didn't want to involve anyone else aside from the Pussycat for the summer camp. But considering what happened and that the hero in question was in a way part of UA student body, then it was clear to both Midnight and Vlad King that they had to bit that bullet and to call for an emergency request to Izuku Midoriya, who for some reason unknown to them was in Nagano working alongside Ingenium to give support to the local heroes that were trying to fight against the sudden increase of villain activity in the area. So let me get this one straight, Izuku said. He was now in the Pussycats agency as he decided to take that emergency request for help from the Pussycats and found himself in the summer camp for the hero students of UA because one of them had a nasty fall that broke his neck. You people of UA decided to make the summer camp in the middle of the mountains, with the closest hospital for heroes at 3 hours distance. In an area that had experienced a sudden increase of villainy out of nowhere to the point that the heroes of Nagano are asking for reinforcements from other areas to keep up, a thing that had happened almost a week before this little summer camp of yours, and none of you thought that maybe something was a little off. The LOV actions may have emboldened the villains a little, but this increase in villain activity out of nowhere in an area that you people were about to set shop for a while should raise some concerns. Izuku said. To be fair to the heroes of UA, Izuku reached that conclusion because Ingenium was the one who explained his concerns to him, and his logic was sound even if it was born out of his concern for his younger brother's safety. Midnight was unable to refute that, and considering that the idea of a spy being on the hero course was starting to take hold in their minds, then maybe they should have considered that detail. Look, I will try to give you people the benefit of the doubt, even if you don't deserve it, and I would admit that getting overly paranoid about the small details all the time isn't the solution. But if the increase of villainy in the area is the result of the LOV direct intervention, then you people are in a place that could become a death trap if the villains decided to attack. One of those villains can create portals made of mist that could allow them to swarm the camp with a massive group of villains as they did in the USJ. Izuku said. The more he spoke about it, the more ashamed they were because Izuku had a good point, and even Nisa tried to tell them that everything was going to be fine. The successful track record of the LOV was quite high, and not taking them in consideration was a mistake. But you didn't call me to give my opinion about what you had done. I came to heal Minetta, and that is what I did, but what the F was he doing to injure his neck? Izuku said, changing the subject from his complaints about what they did. Hetri despised his female classmates by climbing a wall that kept both hot springs baths separated. But a kid that was under the pussycat's care used his quirk to make him fall from that wall, as he was almost at the top, and Minetta had a bad fall. Midnight said, thinking about how Eraserhead didn't even bother to expel Minetta as his antics of pestering the girls and being somewhat disruptive was the kind of student that he would have kicked from the hero course to not deal with. Well, I feel somewhat conflicted now, Izuku said. On the one hand, he found Minetta's antics and actions reprehensible, and even if he left Class 1A behind, he still wasn't as blind to their actions. Minetta's perverted actions somehow managed to make Eraserhead not expel him, and he didn't have that much of a good opinion of someone like him. But on the other hand, the means and the way that Minetta ended that was still not that right. That kid that had caused him to fall and injure his neck could have potentially killed Minetta if he had taken a worse angle during his fall. The situation could have taken a darker tone. Izuku does think that real disciplinary actions should be taken against Minetta to try to make him understand that what he did was unbecoming for a hero. Not this, even if a part of him does consider it a fitting punishment. He healed him in the end, and after discussing the situation with the teachers of UA and the Pussycats, Izuku decided to walk away back to civilization. Not before telling them that they should be ready to call for reinforcement if the situation in the summer camp turned sour, just in case. He reached this summer camp alongside Ingenium because the moment he told him that the Pussycat sent him an emergency request, he got worried about his brother, and then he asked for him to accompany him. Izuku let the man accompany him just in case. And since it was just a medical emergency, then Ingenium was talking with his younger brother, and he was not going to interrupt that impromptu meeting. Ingenium respected Izuku's wishes of not being near his little brother, and during the internship week, Ingenium kept his brother and him separated. Tenya Ida tried only a couple of times to interact with him before Ingenium told his brother that Izuku had the right to not want to deal with those that had displeased him. And Ingenium also told his brother that the way that he treated Izuku was unbecoming for someone that tried to be a hero. It's good to see you again. Midoriya, Izuku heard Kinoko's voice and saw her, alongside some of her classmates. Kinoko was surprised to see Izuku so sharply dressed in that white suit, but maybe that was his choice of attire outside school. I do, but I would have preferred to be in more lighter circumstances, Izuku said. He then saw how Setsuna Tokage decided to talk to him. Hey Midoriya, you're looking quite fancy over there, she said, impressed a little to see Izuku dressing like that. She was used to seeing Izuku in the UA school uniform, but this white suit of his was something else. Well, this is my hero outfit when I am working as a hero. Since I am not going to wear a costume like everyone else, I needed a choice of attire that could project a more serious image, because people had a lot of trouble taking me seriously when I say that I am a hero if I am dressed casually, Izuku said. That's it, Tsukakendo tried to say, but considering that one of her classmates' choices for a hero suit was a black suit with some accessories, then a plain white suit could be perfectly passable as a hero costume. If you were worrying about this white suit and how ready he is for the hero job, then don't worry. Those clothes came from a support company that works closely with Vestiges to create clothes not only heroes, but for people with a need for special need for particular clothes adapted to their bodies and quirk. Izuku admitted. He had to thank Sir Night-Eye for putting him in contact with the hero who decided to help him with the procurement of the suit alongside the contact number of that support company in case he needed anything else. I see, Kinoko said. Well, I healed up Minetta now, and I will return to Nagano now. I hope that you people had a productive summer camp, Izuku said, and then he walked away alongside Ingenium, who had already talked with his brother, and both were going to return to the city. While Ingenium was going to return to Hosu, Izuku decided to stay in a hotel for the week just in case. Because what Ingenium feared about this increase of villainy in the area made him decide to be in the area just in case. He would rather spend a week there than be far away from the area in case the League decided to make an active presence here, and he wasn't nearby to try to stop them. The Tokyo incident in which that Dabi guy burned a lot of the area while being backed up by the Nomus, and his now knowledge about his ties with the probable mastermind of the League made this his responsibility to deal with. Stopping that man was All Might's duty because he wanted to avenge his deceased mentor and was the baggage that came with wielding OFA. It was also Murio's duty because he accepted OFA's power and because he wanted to, but it was Izuku's duty because it was a family thing for his part. Yuii Shigaraki tried to stop his brother to the point of dying for it. So it was his duty to his ancestors to make sure that AFO was stopped once and for all. Yuga Aoyama was having trouble sleeping. He was aware of what was coming to them, and there was a part of him that believed that AFO was planning to get rid of him soon enough. The decision of his parents to contact the villain to give him a quirk ended up becoming the leash that dictated his future, and since he barely had any success in finding who was All Might's successor, then it was clear to him that his usefulness was coming to an end, and Yuga had no delusion of being spared from a grim fate by AFO once he was unable to give him what he wanted. A part of him wanted to confess everything and pray for forgiveness, but then he would have to explain that it was him that allowed Shigaraki to enter UA to find the information about the trip to USJ, that it was he who gave AFO the information about Bakugo's location to him. And that would mean that he would have to reveal the truth about Bakugo's fall into villainy and his final fate as a Nomu. And he was afraid of the consequences for both sides. His parents' lives were under the threat of AFO's minions, and not even if he revealed the truth to you, it would be enough to keep them safe from AFO, as his reach was too long for them to be safe if he snitched. He wanted so badly to reveal the truth to someone, even to Izuku, as the incident that almost killed him was still on his conscience, and he only said the same things as the others because he wanted to forget about his quirkless past, but the fear of the consequences keep him scared. He was damned if he did, damned if he didn't, and the only solution for him to survive at the moment was to still follow AFO's orders regardless of his fears. So he was holding his breath, aware about what was coming for them at the end of the week, and he could only pray for a miracle or divine intervention to save the day, the last day of the week, that Izuku decided to stay in Nagano came, and the heroes in Nagano were on high alert the moment that a Nomu was spotted, taking part in a villain attack that happened at midday, and Izuku decided to call the reinforcements because it was clear to him that AFO had a plan in mind, and that said plan had a target in the area in mind. Izuku then realized that the target of AFO was the summer camp, and before he could even run straight to the mountains, multiple reports of portals of black mist that were appearing all around Nagano and that multiple Nomus were emerging from them meant that Izuku was going to stay there for a while even if he knew that the Pussycats agency and the summer camp was the real target. Ingenium's hunch was right on the money, and even if he told the Pussycats and the teachers of UA that they should be ready to call them in case of an emergency, it appeared that AFO was prepared for that possibility. Those Nomus weren't that strong, but the problem was that there were a lot of them, and they were also given support by normal villains. The scale of this incident was going to be even bigger than the one in Tokyo, and that wasn't good, but he needed to stand tall and fight with everything he had. Deku. In one of the reports about Nomus appearing in the area that he was seeing on his phone, a distorted voice and words made Izuku to pay attention to the screens. It was on one of the main streets in Nagano, and then he saw the source of that voice. No way, Izuku said. He saw a Nomu that was constantly shouting that demeaning nickname that Bakugo used to refer to him, and then he saw that Nomu explode to cause severe damage to those around it. And that included that Nomu itself. But then the Nomu regenerated on its own, and then repeated the process. Izuku had no choice than to try to confront that Nomu himself. And something told him that said Nomu was Bakugo or whatever remained of him in this world. As the Nomus and villains were roaming around Nagano, the summer camp wasn't as safe as the teachers believed, and when the villains started to appear out of nowhere, while the students were participating in a test of courage, and their attempts to call for reinforcements was met with no answer, as the whole prefecture was under the siege of multiple villains and Nomus. Then Izuku's words questioning the wisdom of doing this summer camp, and his concerns of them being trapped by the villains became true. The villains and the Nomus that came to the summer camp were surprisingly prepared to counter the quirks of all the students of Class 1A, a detail that gave some credibility to the theory of a spy being in the hero course, but the heroes didn't have the time to think about a potential spy while their lives were on the line. The villains expected to win based on their numerical superiority and the fact that they were handpicked because they were able to counter at least one of the students of Class 1A, but life never was that convenient, and their clash with the heroes and students scattered in the forest wasn't as smooth as they believed. The villains may have had more real experience in a fight, but the students of the hero class were there for a reason. Those kids were the best of the best that Japanese youth could produce, and even if the standards to nurture that talent weren't that good for half of them, Class 1A still had powerful quirks to compensate in a way for their lack of experience and proper training, while Class 1B had the advantage of proper training thanks to Vlad King Compromise to help his students. But the villains were still holding more than one surprise in store for the heroes and the hero students on the summer camp. And the first one was the infamous Muscular, the man who killed multiple heroes and was responsible for killing Koda's parents. Koda was still in his hiding place as the sounds of villains shouting and the heroes fighting back echoed in the forest. He wanted to stay hidden there until the danger passed, but then someone punched the tree that he was hiding and was sent flying away a small distance. Koda managed to jump and grab the tree branch of another tree before the other tree impacted the ground, and he injured himself somewhat for his troubles. He got on the ground and was panicking now. A villain was nearby and almost killed him. He then tried to run away, but then he heard a voice that made his blood run cold. "Nice hat, kid." Koda looked at the man instead of running away, and then he was face to face with the man that had killed his parents. Koda tried to run away, but he was frozen in fear. Muscular, for his part, was going to kill that brat anyway, because not only was he in his way, but because he was brought here to specifically kill people, so he wasn't going to make an exception now. Koda, a feminine voice reached Koda's ears, and then he saw how Kinoko appeared there alongside some of her classmates. "Hey, you people had spared me the trouble to go and find some of you to kill," Muscular said, and then he started to activate his quirk, covering his body in muscle fibers slowly and menacingly, as he had the intention to play around with those brats before killing them. "Say your prayers, Yuak," Muscular tried to say, but then he felt how something appeared out of nowhere inside his throat, and he was starting to choke. Muscular then used his quirk to manipulate the muscle fibers near his neck to break whatever was clogging his throat, and he ended up swallowing whatever it was. The sound of his throat gulping whatever it was inside there made Kinoko smile a little. "You're going to pay for it," the villain said. Then he suddenly was overwhelmed by a sense of sleepiness that made him fall asleep. In an instant, the moment that those highly altered Racer mushrooms that her quirk created had enhanced the variety of naturally sedative compounds that a Racer mushroom had by default, and that allowed her to forcefully put anyone to sleep if they consumed those mushrooms that she created. They were a little more complicated to create than a normal Racer mushroom, but it was thanks to Izuku's counsel and tips that she managed to discover that side of her quirk. She still didn't know how Izuku managed to figure out that, but she was grateful for that knowledge. She just hoped that the others were okay, and that this All Might and Murio were going as fast as they could in order to reach the summer camp after they got Izuku's emergency call. All Might was soaring in the air, as he was used to do, while Murio was having a crash course in the usage of float to reach the summer camp as fast as possible. Izuku decided to call both Sir Nightai and All Might after he healed Minetta and returned to Nagano to warn them about the possibility of AFO being involved in the increased villain activity in Nagano, because UA's summer camp was going to be done in the area, and considering that AFO ended up being involved in the island incident. Then both heroes decided to be cautious and were preparing for the possibility of something happening, and Izuku's call and warnings of the summer camp being in danger was the signal that their worst fears had come to pass. All Might wasn't informed about the summer camp happening and location, because since he decided to focus on Murio's training of OFA, then Nizu saw no reason to share that info with him. All Might was the one who had to tell Nizu about the possibility of the spike in villain activity in Nagano being the result of a ploy of the LOV. And while Nizu ended up accepting the possible connection, he wasn't that concerned to the point of just canceling the summer camp and letting the students return home, thinking that it would be a chance to capture the LOV if they used the summer camp as bait now. Needless to say, All Might took offense to that callous idea that ended up putting the students in danger and was considering resigning as a teacher in UA, as not only he was now in better condition, but he could help Murio with his training with OFA outside school hours. But he was going to wait to the end of the week to decide what to do. And now it appears that he was going to try to save the students of the hero course from the League of Villains, a thing that he failed in a way as he was far away during the USJ incident, and now story was repeating again. He just hoped to this time reach the camp in time before the students suffered severe injuries. But then he had an idea. Murio, please go to Nagano and lend your help there so you could bring Midoriya with you to the summer camp. All Might ordered. Murio wanted to say something about it, but he knew that it was for the best to have Midoriya around, and if Sir Nitai's musings about AFO having a hand in this, then Izuku's quirk would be needed. So he turned his body in the direction of the nearest city, and after landing in a rooftop, he started his search for Izuku as he dispatched as many nomus and villains that he found in the way to lighten the load of work for the heroes around him. Because even if finding Izuku and then having both of them to go to the summer camp was a priority, he still was a hero, even if he was still a student, and he wasn't going to not lend a hand in the situation if he could help it. Stay back. That thing is dangerous. The hero slide in, Go said as he was in the area alongside some other heroes while trying to contain that Nomu that they named Deku, because the only thing that it could say was that word. The area around him was now surrounded by debris and the corpses of nomus and villains alike. That Nomu made no distinction between allies or enemies and just blew himself up in order to cause as much damage as possible, to then regenerate seconds later to repeat the process again. Sliden Go never expected that his personal investigation about all those low-level villains that stopped going along with the accorded plan and disappeared with those pieces of support gear to cause chaos and gather data for the cause went, and it appeared that the League of Villains had a hand in it. He had joined the heroes of Nagano Prefecture when their request for help came at the beginning of the week, and then here he was fighting the nomus and those villains that were threatening the peace. Sliden Go would fulfill his duty as a hero not only because it was his job, but because it would benefit the goals of the organization where his true loyalty lay. Deku, the Nomu that was created of what remained of Bakugo, said. His body was now just a ball-shaped Nomu that looked like the one of the USJ that when he exploded, used his own bones as part of the shrapnel to enhance his explosions and to maximize the damage. AFO loaded him with multiple regenerative quirks that would fix the damage that he did to himself anytime that he blew himself up, but AFO had no real use for this Nomu aside from being used as a walking bomb that caused as much destruction as possible until someone stopped him. For that reason, Bakugo was designed as a disposable Nomu that while he showed some impressive mind power after the procedure to turn him into the Nomu, as he still was able to speak or think in a way despite the fact that the procedure, Bakugo had being reduced to just blow himself up and to scream constantly the nickname of the one that Bakugo had blamed as the one that had ruined his life. The procedure to turn someone into a Nomu ceases all higher brain functions on the recipient, and considering that the strain of forcing multiple quirks on a person can cause brain damage, then the fact that Bakugo, even in that state, was able to even have some sentience was a miracle and worthy of being considered a candidate to become a high-end Nomu over an easy-to-discard Nomu. But whatever remained of Bakugo's mind had degenerated to the point that now the Nomufied Bakugo saw every person around him as Izuku, and then he activated his quirk to try to kill them. AFO had no need for a Nomu that he couldn't control, and as a way to punish Bakugo for failing to bring anything good to the League, then his final fate would be the one of a disposable weapon. Bakugo in life seeked glory and recognition above all others. So in his death and Nomufication, Bakugo wouldn't receive the glory that he coveted. Everyone, get ready to evacuate the area now. He's gonna blow up. Sliden Go said as he saw how the Nomufied Bakugo turned himself in their direction and started to swell up. That meant that he was able to explode again, and the heroes there weren't sure if they were capable to stop them with what they had. Deku, Bakugo said as he was reaching the breaking point of his body, and he was about to release a powerful explosion that would reach all the heroes around him. Slide Go, and the heroes weren't fast enough to get out of the way, and even if they were out of the range of his explosions, the shrapnel would still reach them. But then out of nowhere, Red tendrils of something that looked like blood came from behind them, and then it turned into a massive wall of red-colored ice that managed to absorb all that shrapnel released by Bakugo. "Sorry I'm late, I tried to come here as fast as I could. But there were a lot of Nomus on the way," Izuku said. His suit was somewhat damaged, but he was still capable of fighting. "It's you, Sliding," Go said. He was seeing now that kid that became a target of interest for the MLA and Redestro after Bakugo's downfall became public, and their information about that quirkless kid in one of their schools was updated after months that Izuku abandoned Aldera. Izuku's rise from a misdiagnosed quirkless kid to the second youngest hero in Japan's recorded history after the HPSC was established in Japan that had now an impressive reputation in Japan because of not only his personal story, but his actions during the island incident made him a wild card on Redestro's grand plan. But this was not the time or the moment to think about that and slide it. Go focused first on the situation that he had in front of him. "It's good to see that you are joining us. We are having a lot of trouble dealing with that 1-inch sliding," Go said. "I can see that you people did the best you could considering the situation," Izuku said. The street was a disaster, and the amount of dead villains and injured heroes around was dawning on Izuku. That thing, it has the power to blow itself up to not only release a massive explosion around him, but also his bones came out of its body at high velocity to cause additional damage as shrapnel. "Some of us have been injured by that shrapnel, but that is not the worst part," Sliding Go said. Izuku then quickly looked around and saw how some of the heroes there not only were showing some lacerations, but a couple of them had lost a limb or two that had been severed probably by that shrapnel. Izuku took a deep breath, and then multiple tendrils of blood emerged from his fingertips and entered the injuries of the heroes around him. Izuku was healing them, but not with super regeneration. During his run through the city to reach the place where the Nomufied Bakugo was, Izuku had to make some quick stops to heal injured heroes who were in critical condition, but what he managed to do with super regeneration was not fast enough in this situation. And then as he berated himself for his slower method, Izuku had a realization. There was a quirk factor in his blood of a quirk that could heal people even faster than super regeneration could, but said quirk was also dangerous to use. But Izuku had no choice if he wanted to heal people faster, and then he decided to use rewind in short bursts instead of super regeneration, and the results were quite good with all things considered. Rewind was an accumulation type quirk that relied on an accumulation of an unknown element that was produced by the body of the quirk wielder to be activated. But since Izuku only assimilated that genetic quirk factor, his body was unable to replicate and accumulate that element, and since he considered rewind a dangerous quirk, then he never bothered to try to use it or figure out how to make it work for him. But with lives at stake and the fear of failing for not being fast enough while healing people, then Izuku had to use his own quirk to quickly rewrite that quirk factor of rewind to use his blood, as that element needed to the quirk to activate, and that made the trick. Izuku now just had to leave a small amount of his blood in a person's blood with rewind activated, and then the person's body rewinded back to a healthier shape than it had in the past before being injured, as long as the blood that he had injected in their body was there. And as that process happened, that blood disappeared from their bodies while leaving the body of the person intact. The process wasn't perfect yet, and with Izuku's lingering fear of the consequences of messing up, the effectiveness of his version of rewind was lower than the original quirk. It could fully heal someone as long as the injuries that they had suffered were on a smaller time frame of less than 1 hour, and Izuku knew that this particular usage of his quirk would be the hardest to MSTR. The heroes that were injured and those that had lost a limb or two then felt how their bodies were healing up in an instant. Even those that lost their limbs saw how those limbs reappeared out of nowhere like they hadn't been taken away at all. "That quirk of yours, Blood Magia, was it? It's quite impressive," Slidin' Go said, witnessing something akin to a miracle while marveling at the power of Izuku's meta ability. "I know, if only I was able to figure out how it worked before," Izuku said, barely paying attention to Slidin' Go's words as he was then thinking about rewinding and if that dangerous quirk could be used to rewind the Nomus back into normal people. It was a long shot, and considering what all Might told him about what the Nomas were, just deceased individuals whose bodies have been heavily modified by AFO and his minions, then maybe they weren't living beings, and that would make the use of rewind useless. But Izuku had to try something in order to try to fix the damage that AFO caused to this world with his evil ways. And if he managed to take out of the board those aberrations by returning them back to human, then that would be like giving that villain the biggest middle finger possible to his plans. Izuku clenched his fists as he saw the ice wall that he created, and when he heard the sound of a Namufied Bakugo calling him by that demeaning name, Izuku made up his mind. I am here, Kachin. Izuku jumped over the wall of ice, but not before telling the heroes to evacuate to another area. And when he landed on the other side and saw the Namufied Bakugo lying broken on the ground, something akin to pity overcame him. I could say that now you look like the villain that you were to me since we were kids, but not even I consider that this is fitting for you to endure, Izuku said as he looked at how Bakugo's Namufied body regenerated on its own. Deku, the Nomu said, showing a flash of the humanity of the person that he was before being turned into a Nomu. But that was because Bakugo held to his hatred of Izuku even when his body and mind were perverted by AFO, keeping certain parts of his brain stimulated enough, so the Namufication progress didn't fully destroy him. But he was now this caricature of who he was. A hero must try to save people until it becomes clear that it would be a pointless endeavor to try so. Let's see if you are now past the point of no return or I can do something about it, Izuku said, and then saw how Bakugo tried to blow himself up again after seeing him. Izuku responded by activating his quirk, letting tendrils of his blood emerge from his fingertips. And then he created a black hole out of his blood that absorbed all the shrapnel that were Bakugo's bones, and then Izuku decided to test his theory. Hope this works, Izuku said, and then he tried to inject some of his blood that had rewind activated, and to his surprise, it worked, but it appeared that a small amount of blood wasn't going to cut it, because he just managed to rewind Bakugo back to before he decided to blow himself up again. Deku! Bakugo shouted again, and Izuku had little time to react besides jumping into the air to reach a rooftop to avoid the shrapnel this time. How much blood is needed to return a Nomu back to human? Izuku said, contemplating how rewind worked with his blood and how much of his own blood he would need to return Bakugo back to human. A part of him believed that putting him out of his misery was the best choice, and that Izuku had no reason to even bother to try to restore him back into a human. But Izuku believed that Bakugo should face a real punishment, and being Namufied and turned into a disposable weapon wasn't the fitting punishment that Bakugo deserved. Bakugo would be judged for his crimes and would make his time in jail. That was what Izuku made sure would happen, as his Namufied state was in a way for Bakugo to avoid suffering the consequences of his actions. Izuku had heard before that one could be cruel to someone to be kind to them, or be kind to someone to be cruel to them. But in this situation, Izuku was going to be both cruel and kind on both ends, because with Izuku's attempt to return Bakugo back to human, he was being kind to Bakugo, as the fate of being a Nomu was something that no one should suffer. But he was also being cruel because his intent on doing that was born of the longing of wanting to force Bakugo to deal with the consequences of his actions. But at the same time, one would consider being in jail over being Namufied as a way kinder fate to have that to be reduced to a mockery of what a human was supposed to be. Let's do this, Izuku said as he decided that he would need to figure out the amount of blood needed to undo the process of someone being turned into a Nomu on the fly, and would have to pray to not F this one up that badly if he went overboard. The situation in the summer camp was more or less stable if one considered that despite the fact that the villains were trying to overwhelm the hero and the hero students by throwing as many low-level villains and Nomus at them as possible, as the heroes were holding their ground somewhat. Mandalay and Ragdoll used their quirks to quickly find and communicate with the students that were still in the forest, and to get them to retreat, but there's still some students that were still missing inside the forest. During the chaos, Yuga Aoyama entered the forest for some reason, and he refused to return when he had been called out. Midnight entered the forest and went to where Ragdoll said that he was located while Vlad King tried to locate the other students. And then she saw that Aoyama had been shot in the CHSD as he was surrounded by other students that were unconscious or dead on the ground. The assailant was a boy in school uniform that wore a helmet that completely covered his face and was armed with a gun. Aoyama, Midnight said, horrified when she saw the hole in Aoyama's CHSD that was in the area where his heart was. She wasn't able to see from this distance if he was alive or not. But considering that she was now getting the hell out of dodge of that gun's direction after she saw how the kid was about to pull the trigger after he aimed at her, then she won't have the time to confirm it unless she deals with that villainous brat. I guess that shooting at a real hero is not the same as shooting at a hero student. The villainous boy said. He had been sent by AFO with a specific mission to shoot down a blonde hero student that was in the camp. AFO refused for some reason to reveal his target identity, but he decided to gun down every blonde kid that he found just to be sure that he got the right one. And he already gunned down one blonde BSTRD that was quite boastful about his quirk before shooting him in the head while he was busy boasting, and now he was dealing with a hero. "What had you done?" Midnight asked, trying to see if the boy would boast about his accomplishments here, so she could obtain some information. "Well, I just shot a blonde kid in the head after putting his friends to sleep as he was falling to the ground, and then I shot the other one. There is someone really interested in getting a blonde kid from the hero course dead, but he never told me who I was supposed to kill, so I decided to just shoot to death at any blonde person that I found here. Not a bad plan if I say so myself." The villain said. He was going to then move to execute the other kids who were unconscious on the ground, but he decided that he was going to add a hero to his kill count before doing that. "You," the heroine said while angered, but she could at least consider now that the gas that the boy's quirk could put people to sleep, but that mask meant that he may not be immune to his own quirk. "You see, I could kill them now, but I have another idea," the villain said. He then aimed at the tree where the heroine was and then talked again. "You either get out of your hiding place and face me, or I start shooting those kids in the head." Midnight heard those words, and considering the fact that the villain had shot Aoyama in the CHSD, then she had no choice but to comply, even if a part of her believed that said villain was going to shoot the kids anyway. "Good, stay still." That villain aimed his revolver at her and was about to pull the trigger, but then All Might came out of nowhere and punched the villain in the face, sending him flying into a tree while destroying the helmet that covered his face, showing that it was a teenager like the one that he had killed. All Might looked at the villain that he had punched and was sad to see that it was a kid like those of the hero course. The fact that he was here meant that AFO got his hands on him, but there was also the fact that somewhere along that boy's life, something went wrong and that pushed that boy into this path, but he had no time to think about what was corrupted that boy and focused on the students and the heroine that was there. "All Might," Midnight said. The hero was looking at her with a mix of anger and disappointment. Feelings that she couldn't deny were unwarranted, as their decision to continue the camp was a foolish one, as Izuku's concerns should have been listened to, and they should have either returned to Mustafu or go elsewhere. But Next insisted to keep the students there in case that the LOV was there to use them as bait to capture the League, and that was the last straw for her. Both Vlad King and her were going to Resang after the week, but they had committed the mistake of thinking that nothing would happen. They could have decided to ignore Niza's words and taken the kids back, even if that meant to be fired, but their decision to try to see how this could go backfired on them. Midoriya did call me the day after he healed Minetta and told me his concerns about a possible ploy of the League of Villains on the area. I was more or less in the prefecture, ready to move just in case, because the threat of the League was that severe, and the reason that I was able to come here that early was that I agreed with him and decided to be on standby in the area, just in case, even if I am late again, as I was during the USJ incident, All Might sadly said as he looked at Yuga Aoyama, who had a hole in his CHSD in the area where the heart was. Then he got closer to check on him, unsure if there was something to be done, but then All Might sensed something when he touched Aoyama's CHSD near the injury. All Might sensed that Aoyama's heart was still beating. It was really weak, but maybe that meant that there was still a small hope for him. "Just stay here for a moment, Midnight. I will take those kids back to the camp as fast as I can," All Might said as he carried Aoyama first to the camp before returning to retrieve the other students. "Deku!" Bakugo screamed as he started to swell up again before blowing up. Izuku waited for the moment that Bakugo did that to try to use his quirk, but it was clear that he was going to have to brute force his way into showing as much blood into Bakugo as possible in as little time as needed, because the only thing that Rewind did to the Namified Bakugo was to rewind his body to a point before he exploded, or nothing at all, because he rewound the clock enough to set Bakugo back into a time that his body was already destroyed by his own self-detonation. Izuku at this point believed that his shaky control of Rewind, alongside his lack of experience with that quirk, was going to make this task more complicated than it needed to be. "Not again," Izuku said. Injecting 1 whole liter of blood wasn't enough by the looks of it, and Bakugo was now almost ready to explode again, but then... Power! Murio, Togata's voice reached his ears, and he saw how Murio dived from the air into Bakugo's CHSD and shoved him strong enough to send Bakugo flying into a crater that he had created before. "Thanks for the save, Murio, but why are you wearing a boot on your head?" Izuku asked. Murio Tagata looked quite disheveled at the moment, like he'd gone through a tornado or something. "Let's say that my mastery of float is still a work in progress," Murio said, feeling a little ashamed of the fact that one flying Nomu caught him by surprise when he was still in the air and shoved him into an abandoned apartment, and when he managed to get the Nomu off him, one yellow boot found its way on the top of his head. "Would you get offended if I told you that I had a strange dream in which I saw you with a pompadour hairstyle? Because that boot in your head is making me remember that weird dream right now," Izuku said out of nowhere. "A pompadour?" Murio said, contemplating Izuku's words as the sound of Bakugo's explosion reached their ears, and both Izuku and Murio got out of the way of the shrapnel created by Bakugo's bones. "Sorry for saying that. I'm trying to use rewind to fix Bakugo, but I can't manage to get it right," Izuku said as both landed on a nearby rooftop. "Rewind? Was that one of those quirks that you had that you said that it was too dangerous to use?" Murio said. He knew something about Izuku's quirk inner workings and how many quirks he had. The idea of a quirk that worked like AFO but didn't steal a quirk, but just a minuscule part of a quirk existed, and that same quirk came from the bloodline that the original wielder of OFA was ironic. Yeah, but considering what we know about what the Nomus are, then maybe rewind could be the key to saving many lives that had been ruined by AFO, including Bakugo, Izuku said. "Wait, Bakugo, you don't mean that," Murio tried to say, but then was stopped when he saw how Izuku simply nodded at him. "That the Nomu that ate your dynamite entry was Bakugo." "Yes, that Nomu is Bakugo," Izuku said. "I see, and when you say that rewind could save many lives, I am implying that maybe I could use the quirk to rewind a Nomu back into a human, but I am having trouble gauging the amount of blood needed to do that, and I'm starting to tire out a little," Izuku said. "I see I came here with the intent to give you a lift to the summer camp, but something tells me that you want to see this one thought," Murio said. "Yeah, it's weird for me to say this, considering my poor story with Bakugo, but I owe him at least to give this a try. I think I have an idea. I just need a little of your help," Izuku said. "I am all ears," Murio said as he took the yellow boot off his head. "Well then, you have to," Deku Bakugo said, wandering the destroyed streets searching for something, anything to focus on for him to attack. Murio then decided to rush him quickly and then punched him in the face, causing the Nomu to explode again. But Murio permeated into the ground for a couple of seconds before emerging again after Bakugo was now trying to regenerate from his self-immolation. "I hope this works," Murio said, and then he used black WHB to try to restrain Bakugo by cocooning him with those black tendrils of energy while deliberately keeping some of those injuries that Bakugo caused himself after exploding open, so Izuku could have some margin of error to use rewind. 1 liter of blood is not enough to rewind Bakugo into a human, but if I go overboard, I could rewind him out of existence. I need you to help me keep him restrained, so I can focus on using rewind with my own blood without having to worry about getting out of the way." Murio remembered what Izuku had told him, and he was improvising on the fly to allow Izuku to succeed in his plan. Murio did understand Izuku's intent when he tried to reverse the progress of namification that Bakugo had suffered, and if this ended working, then maybe they could save those individuals that were turned into those abominations without hope of salvation. "All right, let's try 2 liters," Izuku said as blood emerged from his fingertips and then flew into the cocoon of black tendrils that Murio created with black WHB. The blood entered Bakugo's namified body, and then Izuku saw how that red glow that his version of rewind caused when it was affecting someone was weakly emerging from the small gaps of that cocoon, and then Murio waited for the glow to die down before deactivating black WHB. "It worked," Murio said when he deactivated black WHB and saw a clearly human Bakugo that was for some reason lacking 1 arm, covered with injuries, and was really pale. Bakugo then fell to the ground like a puppet whose strings were cut. Izuku then created tendrils of blood that entered Bakugo's body and then said something. "He is quirkless," Izuku said. He wasn't sure how that happened, but because rewind didn't heal people per se, but just turned back the clock on a person's body to leave them in a previous state no matter what was their body at that time, then maybe Bakugo had been tortured by AFO, and then had his quirk taken away before being turned into a Nomu. Is this supposed to happen? Murio said as he saw how Izuku was now healing Bakugo's body with super regeneration. Not with rewind, as Izuku wasn't going to go that far to rewind Bakugo more than necessary. Yes, rewind just rewinds a person's body to a state that they had in the past. I may still have trouble tapping into the full power of this quirk, but rewind had worked as intended. Bakugo's body was rewinded to a point in the past before he was turned into a Nami, but none of us knew how Bakugo's body was in the past before being Namuified. Izuku said as he was getting over with healing Bakugo. I see, but what should we do now? Murio asked. Well, there is still an arrest warrant against Bakugo, so we could take him to the police department in the area, so they could keep him in jail for the moment. All the police departments in the whole prefecture are still holding on despite this villainous raid going strong. Maybe AFO cares so little about the police that he thinks that leaving them around wouldn't make a difference to his plans. Izuku said, Maybe, but we need to be fast. All Might may have reached the summer camp to lend aid to the heroes there, but it would be for the best for you to be there just in case. Murio said, Yeah, I get it. But first, we need to get him to safety, Izuku said. Looking at the now unconscious Bakugo, still feeling somewhat conflicted about the situation, but it was time to let it go. Bakugo's fate was not his responsibility, and this was the last act of kindness that he would do for the boy who once was his friend before society's biases corrupted him into the villain that he is today. The opposite of love, in a way, is not hate, but indifference. When you love or hate someone, you care in a way about their fate positively or negatively depending on your feelings about that person. But when you are indifferent to someone, you don't care about that person anymore, and saving him was the last time that Izuku would actually care about his fate. Now Bakugo was on his own for either better or worse. He was washing his hands on him, and now it was not his concern anymore unless he found his way to be a pest to him while being in jail or serving whatever punishment that he needed to do after his trial. The situation in the summer camp was more or less getting under control at the moment thanks to All Might, who came out of nowhere and pushed back all those Nomus and low-level villains who were keeping them under pressure. For the safety of the students, only All Might decided to go back into the forest once all the students and those who were injured were back in the camp. To All Might and Midnight's relief, it appeared that Nito Monoma had somehow managed to survive that headshot thanks to the fact that the bullet that was going to hit him in the head got him when he was falling to the ground. And as he was falling, Monoma's head arched back a little, and that made that the bullet ended grazing him between the eyes instead of killing him. But he would have a scar in the forehead as a reminder of what happened. As for Aoyama, he was bandaged and was being looked over by some of his classmates. This is my fault, Aoyama said. A lot of people thought that he was just chastising himself for what happened, but the truth was that he was now being overwhelmed by despair. It was clear now that AFO had decided that he was disposable and wanted him out of the picture to cover his tracks. That could mean that his parents were next, and there was nothing that he could do to save them unless a miracle happened. Then out of nowhere, everyone saw how Izuku landed in a clear near the main building, and then he walked to see the heroes and students there. Then they saw how Murio was diving into the forest with no signs of stopping as he was going to crash into a tree, but then he permeated through it and then disappeared into the forest. Aside from the emergency landing, I can say that I would recommend Lemillion Airlines 10 times out of 10. Izuku joked after he looked at the heroes, and then he looked at Kinoko and the others and got serious. I will spare the heroes here at the moment of the whole sharing my feelings about the situation, and I will focus on healing those that are the most injured first, Izuku said, and then he moved to Nito Monoma and the other students who were injured by the other villains before they managed to return on their own to the camp. Aoyama saw how Izuku healed Monoma's injury and moved to heal him, and then he cracked under the weight of his guilt. The sound of All Might's fists cracking the jaw of a villain that could turn his teeth into deadly weapons in order to incapacitate the villain while breaking all his teeth at the same time echoed in the forest as All Might contemplated his surroundings. Nomus and low-level villains were lying around unconscious on the ground, as All Might was almost done with the sweeping of the area. But All Might refused to let his guard down as he knew that as long as AFO had a hand on this. So, until the villain was out of commission, nothing was safe from that villain's influence. Then, the sounds of explosions put him on alert, and he saw that the white-haired villain that attacked the USJ was coming to face him. All Might was looking at Yuii Shigaraki, and it was clear that something had happened to him, because one of his arms was now looking like it was part of a Nomu, and now he was able to release small explosions from his hand palms like Bakugo did with his quirk. Yuii used those explosions to propel himself into him, while fighting now in a similar way as Bakugo did, but only with the difference that Yuii had his decay quirk that made him dangerous should his hands manage to reach him. All Might was now dodging his explosions while considering his options. It was clear to him that the only way to stop Yuii was to rip his arms off, so he was unable to use both explosion and decay. But All Might was wary of taking the obvious action, as he considered that maybe AFO had prepared a nasty surprise for someone that tried to take Yuii's arms off. So All Might was focused on the defense in order to let Yuii get close to him, so he could punch him to incapacitate him instead. But then, before All Might was able to get ready to punch Yuii as he was about to get close to him, Murio Togata came out of nowhere and crashed into Yuii, impacting with multiple trees while knocking Yuii out. You really need to get that control of yours afloat figured out, Murio. You can't just crash into people like that even if it is a valid tactic to defeat a villain, All Might said. You may be right, All Might, but at least Midoriya appreciated the dynamic entry after all. He was fighting the Nomufied Bakugo before I reached him. Murio said. I see, All Might said. Considering Mirio's words about a Nomufied Bakugo, and then remembering Yuii's new ability to create explosions from his hands and accepting that information with no issue. I had to help him to put that chapter of his life to a close for good before bringing him herein with it. We may have found a way to Murio try to share with All Might the discovery of a way to restore the Nomus back to normal, but then a malevolent presence caught his attention, and then both All Might and Murio looked at the newcomer. It's you, All Might said, clenching his fist as he was now face to face with the imposing figure of the man who was his nemesis, that same man who had injured him in the past, and whose shadow still loomed above Japan. You are, Murio said as he looked at the man that now was his responsibility to defeat once and for all since he had taken OFA as his own quirk. AFO, the villain that had started this whole feud that was born the moment that he had undeservedly killed his brother by mistake as he was carelessly killing members of the resistance group that had saved Yuichi from him. And in his rage to punish those that had taken Yuichi away from him ended being the one that ended his dear brother's life, was now in front of them. A tall man with a black suit and a strange mask that covered his face was now looking at Yuii, or looked like he was doing that as he shook his head. Is good be now in the presence of the new wielder of my brother's quirk, AFO said in a faux polite tone. He was unable to resist the siren call to put an end to his nemesis's life. And the moment that one of the Nomus that were meant to keep both him and the doctor updated on the situation in the camp showed that All Might was there, he decided to change his plan and go for the kill. But it appeared that he would have an interloper that would make the stakes on this fight higher, but also the end reward even more sweeter. You, All Might said, keeping his guard up as he was still able to keep up this power for at least an hour before he was forced to rely on shock absorption and super regeneration. You should have made sure that I was truly dead after you were done pummeling my skull into the ground, All Might. That lack of diligence on your part was a slide of luck for me, AFO said as he tried to get a rise out of him. You are right, but I will make sure that this time, you will stay dead for good, All Might said. There was a lot at stake here, so he had no choice but to use lethal force against this menace that had ruined and destroyed multiple lives just for his childish longing to be a demon lord. Bold words for a failure such as yourself. But make no mistake, you and your successor will suffer the same fate as those that opposed me in the past, and I will reclaim OFA at last, so try to make something worthwhile remember of your last fight on this world, AFO said, and then he decided to get serious in this fight. This was going to be a fight to remember, but who would be the one standing to remember this bout? I have a confession to make, Yuga Aoyama said that after Izuku had healed him. He knew that what he was going to say was going to ruin his life in a way, but considering that AFO had shown that he was now outlived his usefulness and was willing to get him killed, then Aoyama saw that he was screwed anyway. What are you talking about? Izuku asked, a little confused about why Aoyama was now looking quite defeated despite the fact he had been healed. The attack on the USJ now, this situation, they are my fault, Aoyama said. None of the teachers or students knew what to do with that confession, as they were still lacking some context. But then Aoyama dropped a massive bomb with his next words. I am a spy for the League of Villains, and the one that leaked the location of the summer camp to them. Those words caused the students and heroes in the camp to look at him with a mix of pity, anger, and confusion. UBSDRD? One of those students of Class 1A, Eijiro Kirishima, decided to try to attack Aoyama in a fit of anger and frustration, as that admission of being a spy for the villains turned him into the perfect scapegoat for them to blame for their misery since the beginning of the school. But then, Izuku caught his fist before he could even reach Aoyama's face. "Stand down," Izuku said. He was looking at Kirishima in the eyes, and while he was able to see the anger in his eyes, Izuku knew that attacking Aoyama at this point was useless. "You?" Kirishima said, feeling upset at the fact that someone was stopping him from giving that villain what he deserved. "You may be justified in your anger, but now is not the time for this," Izuku said as he gently pushed Kirishima back before looking at Aoyama, who was now looking at the ground in shame. "If what you say is true, then you better start talking about the League's plans and your involvement in them, because if what you say is true, then you are in a lot of trouble," Izuku said while addressing Aoyama, who then decided to plead for one last thing before revealing a detail that convinced Izuku to make one last call to someone who could help him fulfill Aoyama's demand. "Sir Nightai, I need something from you." Izuku picked up his phone and called Sir Nightai, who wasn't at the moment in Nagano and was the only one that could help him at the moment to see if Aoyama's parents were safe and sound so he could take them into custody for their safety. Izuku was telling Sir Nightai about the fact that Class 1A had a spy who worked from AFO and that he was going to testify all he knew as long as they secured the lives of his parents. "Thank you," Izuku said before Sir Nightai ended the call. Aoyama looked at Izuku with some expectation in his eyes. "A group of heroes of the Ididen Agency that are near the area where you told me that your parents live are on the way to check things out and to take them under custody, so you better start revealing some info about what happened to Bakugo and how he ended like that," Izuku said. The information that Aoyama shared to convince Izuku to make that call was that he knew the truth about Bakugo's escape from his home and that he was turned into a Nomu. The moment that Aoyama talked about Bakugo being turned into a Nomu was what made Izuku trust his words about him being a spy for the League, because, at this moment, only himself and Murio knew about Bakugo's previous nomification, and showing knowledge about that detail was proof that Izuku couldn't deny. "AFO ordered me to first find All Might's true successor, but since I wasn't making too much progress with it after All Might started to deal only with the third years, he ordered me to find information about Bakugo, as he considered him a potential asset to the League," Aoyama said. "So that means I was the one that revealed to AFO Bakugo's home location and how he had been expelled from you, for him to then kidnap him. While Bakugo was in his bedroom, the window that was shattered in his bedroom was broken by AFO to give people the idea that Bakugo escaped his house arrest so he could coerce him into joining the League," Aoyama said as the students of Class 1A were looking at him with anger and contempt in their eyes. "That checks out, but why Bakugo and the League trashed my apartment?" Izuku asked. "Bakugo talked about those stalker notebooks of yours that contain notes about quirks, and AFO got curious about them, but since they found only one notebook that was empty, Shigaraki flipped out and tried to kill Bakugo for wasting his time. Bakugo fought back and took one of Shigaraki's arms before AFO stepped up and incapacitated Bakugo to them, have him turned into a Nomu," Aoyama confessed. "I see," Izuku said, processing the information that Aoyama shared with him, and then he looked at the teachers of you two. "Keep this one under custody in a safe place away from the others. Aoyama has a lot of information about the League and the true mastermind behind them," Izuku said to Midnight and Vlad King, who looked at Izuku for a couple of seconds before they decided to do as he told, because it made a lot of sense. Then the sound of explosions in the vicinity echoed in the mountain, and everyone was panicking. Everyone knew that All Might was in the forest fighting against the villains, but that sound alongside the massive gust of wind and sound wasn't giving off the feeling that things were going all right at the moment. "I guess that now is the time to get this over with," Izuku said as he made his mind up about what he was going to do after he saw how the teachers took Aoyama into the Pussycats Agency building, and then he decided to enter the forest to see if All Might and Murio needed his help. "It appears that despite looking healthier than I expected, you still are weak, All Might," AFO said. Both were now trading blows in the clear of the forest that had been created after both clashed fists strong enough to create a shockwave that tore all the trees away. All Might refused to reply and was still focused on trying to end AFO once and for all, but not even being in that pitiful state meant that AFO wasn't a threat anymore. AFO lived long enough and stole multiple quirks in the past, and while he lacked any kind of martial arts knowledge to fight, as he just brute forced his way on a fight by using multiple quirks, AFO still was able to compensate all his flaws with having multiple quirks around to enhance his powers to the point that one hit was what he needed to win. Murio was focused on Shigaraki, and despite the fact that Shigaraki was now an even more dangerous foe, with explosion added to his arsenal, Murio's usage of his permeation made Shigaraki's attempts to kill him useless while Shigaraki was unable to retaliate. But there was something off in Shigaraki. He looked a little unfocused during the fight, as he was more acting on an impulse than to be using his head to strategize. I have so many hopes for that boy, but it appears that Shigaraki is as much a disappointment as his grandmother was when she faced May guess that the apple didn't fall that far off the tree in that regard. AFO said mockingly, trying to grab All Might's attention to deal a psychological blow when he revealed the truth about Shigaraki's origins. That was something that he wanted to save for another date, but might as well use that info now to hurt All Might even further. What? All Might said. You see, your dearest mentor had a kid, one that she had to give away to protect him from me. That kid grew embittered and resentful of heroics, and when he grew up, he had a family. Or did you never find odd about a whole family of individuals with a family named Shimura dying in their house one day out of the blue with no explanation? AFO said. You? All Might said he knew better than to listen to the man, and he knew about that incident when he one day tried to find something about his mentor and if she had any family, but the only thing he found out was about that incident. I didn't have a hand on it. So when I found out that boy as an adult, I manipulated that boy in subtle ways to get him to have another child, so I could use him as a tool for my revenge, as the little girl that they had was already too grown up for me to manipulate. Tamura Shigaraki is the name that I gave to Tenko Shimura when I made sure that the boy snapped and manifested the quirk that I gave him so he could kill his family in an outburst of fear and anger. AFO said. He knew that his words were hurting All Might, and he reveled in that feeling. No, yes, All Might. It was me the one that orchestrated Tamura's whole existence and growth, so I could use him to get revenge on you. But sadly, that boy's mind was too weak, and he was unable to endure the strain on his mind when I gave him explosion. So now that I moved to another subject, then I see no need to have Tamura around aside from using him as an attack dog. AFO said as he then decided to throw a haymaker on All Might's face when he was shocked after hearing that. All Might was sent flying, but thanks to shock absorption and super regeneration, he managed to tank that hit with only a dull sting on his face as a testament to what AFO did to him right now. But it appears that not even as an attack dog, Tamura is able to live up to my expectations, so might as well put him down and end his suffering, AFO said, and then he decided to target Tamura in order to kill him in front of All Might in order to cause as much damage as possible to the hero, as the realization of how he had single-handedly destroyed his mentor's legacy just despite him was a victory in on its own for him. No! All Might said has tried to reach AFO in order to stop him from killing Shigaraki, but he was too late. Shigaraki felt how AFO's fist pierced his stomach, and then he was thrown away like he was trash. All Might saw how Tamura was now bleeding to death as he caught his body before he hit the ground. Hi hit is what I want you to feel, All Might. You, that foolish successor of yours, your stupid mentor, and those that came before her. All of you will pay for keeping Yuichi away from me, AFO said in a menacing way. Murio decided to step up in order to fight AFO, as All Might was still recovering from the shock of those multiple revelations while holding the now dying Shigaraki in his arms. AFO ended up relenting to Dr. Garaki's insistence to find a more suitable vessel as his next body, and after offering a better deal to a certain lab rat who was the one that now wielded a prototype of AFO. AFO considered Shigaraki's usefulness almost spent and decided to squeeze the last mileage out of him before putting him down. Now he only had to make sure to break that foolish boy in front of him before he could claim complete victory and would be able to be reunited at last with his brother, or what remained of him. Things were going surprisingly smoothly for him, and he wanted to get this done quickly before he ran out of luck. Well then, boy, show me now why you think that you are worthy of my brother's quirk, and allow me to crush your body and spirit for your insolence," AFO said as he charged in Murio's direction to fight with the ninth successor of OFA and to put this years-long war between himself and his brother to an end. He was AFO, the true demon lord of this world, and once he reclaimed his brother's quirk, then no one would be capable of stopping him. As he knew that the only thing that could stop him was his brother's quirk, it was not like there was someone else around that could fight him off without relying on the power of OFA. AFO was now locked in combat with Murio. Togata, and what AFO believed that it would be an easy fight became something else. No matter how many strength-enhancing quirks he stacked with each other, or how many speed-enhancing quirks he activated, AFO was now getting accustomed to one simple rule of combat: that all the power and speed that he put into his blows were useless if he was unable to hit his foes. Murio was using his permeation quirk to get around AFO's colossal strength, because even he knew that tanking one of his punches in this state was almost suicidal. He was trying to avoid fully permeating into the ground in case AFO decided to attack a desolated All Might that was looking at the near-dead Shigaraki with a mix of sorrow and despair in his eyes. All Might hadn't taken well the revelation of Shigaraki's origins, and the only thing that Murio could do at the moment was to keep the villain focused on himself to allow All Might to recover. "If I can't hit you, then I will just change my target then," AFO said as he activated multiple quirks to enhance his right arm to the point that it became an enlarged mess of muscle, skin, bone, and metal that AFO wanted to use to kill All Might. Murio tried to use Black WHB to stop AFO, but it was impossible for him to pin the villain down now. All Might looked at the villain who was about to reach him with that oversized arm. But the moment that AFO was about to throw a punch, AFO's oversized arm quickly returned to normal. AFO was shocked at the fact that he was feeling how his quirks were being canceled out of nowhere, and then something blasted him in the stomach with enough force to send him flying back into the nearest tree. Murio was speechless, as he was unable to see who entered the fray to stop AFO as a cloud of dust emerged after AFO was sent flying. But then it dissipated and he saw that Izuku was there. "I guess that I made it in time by the looks of it," Izuku said. He looked at his surroundings, and then he saw how All Might was holding a mortally wounded Shigaraki in his arms. "Midoriya, please, help him," All Might said while looking at Shigaraki. Izuku could have asked why, but considering the urgency of the situation, he then decided to just do what All Might asked him to do and took the injured Shigaraki from him. "Go kick his butt. I will see what I can do, but I want an explanation later," Izuku said as he then decided to use his blood quirk to heal Shigaraki, but he was going to sabotage his genetic quirk factor while he was at it, because even if All Might asked him to save a villain's life, Izuku wasn't going to let Shigaraki be a threat anymore if he can help it. "Thank you," All Might said, and then he entered the fray, just in time to see how AFO also got back to the clearing in the forest while being annoyed at Izuku's surprise attack. "I guess someone has a death wish and decided to get involved in this fight," AFO said, somewhat pissed off at the fact that someone had a quirk to cancel his quirks. But it couldn't be Eraserhead, as he was now forced to work as a hero under the HPSC in order to keep his license as a hero, and the HPSC refused to deploy him here. "It's time to end this," AFO All Might said, focusing his anger and hatred on the man who had destroyed the lives of multiple innocents in the past because of his deluded longing to be a demon lord in this day and age. "So you return to the fight now. I guess that you had put Tenko Shimura out of his misery," AFO said, trying to get another shot at All Might. "You are going down today, AFO. Mark my words," All Might said, and then he rushed at AFO in order to defeat him. Murio joined his efforts, and both now were teaming up in order to take AFO down for good. AFO was strong and had multiple quirks at his disposal, but even he wasn't able in this situation to fight at his fullest, as both All Might and Murio fighting together were allowing them to push AFO back. All Might, even with his strength reduced, was still able to fight back against AFO, and with Murio, who was able to use OFA up to 50% of its full output and all the quirks stored in them, the chances to finally put AFO down for good was higher than ever. But as that clash of titans was occurring now, the different kind of fight was happening now at the same time. Izuku was now messing up with Shigaraki's quirk factors in order to neuter him as a threat, but he instead ended up seeing his past. And Bakugo's past at the same time as Shigaraki was also wielding Bakugo's quirk as well. is all Deku's fault. Poor kid. He looks so horrible, but a hero would come eventually. I'm not wrong. Those idiots think that Deku's quirk is better than mine, when is it not? Don't worry, child, I am here. The images and voices of the memories of Bakugo and Shigaraki were flooding his mind. And while he knew enough of Bakugo, already to the point that he managed to block those memories from overwhelming him, Shigaraki's memories were stronger, and he was unable to fully push them out of his mind. When Izuku was able to push through Shigaraki's memories, he was now in front of the house that Shigaraki knew, where Tenko Shimura lived, and he saw that the door was open. Do you really want to know what heroes are? They're people who hurt their own families only to help complete strangers. Izuku heard the voice of the man who was Tenko's father, and then he heard how he harmed his son for the crime of wanting to be a hero. More voices and memories about the abuse that Tenko suffered started to flood his mind as he entered the home. Those memories were filled with fear and hatred. And even if the memories of Tenko's grandparents and mother trying to console him were also flooding into his mind, those memories were emotionally weaker, as Tenko was too focused on the pain that he endured to even feel something else. Dear God, Izuku reached the living room and saw the visage of what Tamura Shigaraki once was before AFO interfered in his life. He was trapped inside a mass of flesh that was made of multiple arms that were keeping him trapped. Izuku tried to get closer, but then one of those arms stopped holding Tenko and then extended to grab him instead. Izuku retaliated and then grabbed that arm and tore it away. You know, Izuku said as he then dropped that arm into the ground, I can relate in a way with your shitty childhood. Sure, my dad wasn't abusing me, but I suffered the scorn and mockery of other adults for daring to dream of being a hero. But while someone saved you from your situation, I saved myself. Izuku said. He walked forward, and then more arms started to try to grab him, but Izuku swatted them away like they were flies. For as much as this society is so enamored with heroism, a lot of the people are too selfish and self-centered to do the right thing. I saw your memories about how you wandered the streets after the debacle of your family, and no one lent you a hand. No one except AFO, the same AFO that turned you into this. Izuku saw that his words made that kid shake as more arms flew at him. Izuku extended his arm, and then a black hole emerged from his fingertips. I don't have too much faith in society after what happened to me, but after some time and thanks to those around me, I found out the way for me to go forward, Izuku said as he started to get closer and closer to Tenko. I decided to try my best to save those that society had failed in their time of need. I found a way to save Himiko from her fate, and even now I think that you too can be saved, but the question is if you want to be saved. Izuku said, as he got near Tenko, who now was just sitting on the ground, looking at him with an empty look in his eyes. Why? Tenko said. His voice was quite weak and barely resembled Shigaraki's voice. Because at the end of the day, to truly save someone, they had to want to be saved for that to fully stick. You were wronged by the world since you were born, and no one gave you a genuine chance to have a normal life. So I will give you that chance, but only if you take it. Izuku said. Tenko was unsure what to do, but he then weakly nodded at him. Thank you, Izuku said, and then he disappeared out of Tenko's sight. Tenko wasn't sure what was going on or what was going to happen, but he then started to feel a strange warmth envelop him, and then he closed his eyes. Hoping for things to change, when he opened them again, the battle between AFO and All Might, who was teaming up with Murio, was raging on with fists clashing with enough power to shake the earth and generate shockwaves that caused enough destruction in the surroundings, and the sounds of that destruction almost echoed in the whole prefecture. All Might managed to tell Murio that they should push AFO far away from Izuku, who was busy tending to Shigaraki to allow him to do his job, and now that they were far away from him, the true battle began. AFO was too used to overwhelming his foes with his superior power that was born of all the quirks he stole, and he was starting to realize that he didn't fare that well against opponents that managed to get near his level and knew how to fight with some modicum of skill. AFO was now getting more and more frustrated because he was unable to get that easy win that he wanted, and he was starting to get desperate. And then, the cries of a baby reached the three combatants' ears, and that confused them. All Might and Murio knew that Izuku was far away from them alongside Shigaraki, and they weren't able to explain that baby's cry that came out of nowhere. AFO then decided to take advantage of the situation and rushed in that direction, as he was thinking about using whatever that was as a human shield if needed to get an advantage in this fight, and Murio alongside All Might pursued him to stop him from doing whatever he had in mind. AFO was using that infrared quirk of his to compensate for his lack of sight, and then he saw the figure of a kid who was holding something that looked like a baby in his arms. Finally, something that I can use to AFO tried to say, but then he started to feel again how all his quirks were starting to turn off again. That also meant that those quirks that he was using to fly were also turned off, and that meant that he was now a human projectile that was reaching terminal velocity, as the lack of those quirks that managed to allow him to fly meant that he was unable to safely land on the ground. Seconds before he was about to hit the ground, AFO's quirk started to function again, and he managed to avoid the worst outcome for a couple of seconds, but he still damaged himself in the process. Midoriya, Murio said, as both All Might and himself landed near a near-exhausted Izuku, who was holding a baby that had black hair. What is that baby doing here? All Might asked, panicking a little at the fact that Shigaraki was nowhere to be found. This baby is Shigaraki, or what he was supposed to be before AFO started to ruin his life, Izuku said. He decided to push his limits with his version of Rewind and managed to turn Shigaraki back into a baby, but losing almost 4 liters of blood and all the fatigue that he had accumulated today was starting to make a dent in his body, and he was reaching the limit of what he could do. No way, All Might said. He did expect Izuku to heal Shigaraki's body, but to go to the point of turning him into a baby wasn't what he expected. I did it. I used my quirk to mess with his quirk factor while healing him in the process, and too saw his past and found out the last traces of his innocence there. I asked him if he wanted to be saved, and I decided to grant him his request. But what kind of salvation one could give to someone who had been a pawn of a villain scheme since he was born, but to give him a chance to start again for real? Izuku said. Both All Might and Murio were about to contemplate the morality of what Izuku had ended up doing to save Shigaraki's life. But then they heard an explosion nearby, and they knew that AFO wasn't going to stop there and politely give his 2 cents about that moral quandary. All Might take Tenko to where the others are. I will try my best to help Murio, even if I'm reaching my limits, Izuku said, and then he gave All Might the baby that was Tenko Shimura, who was covered in the rags of what were his clothes before Izuku rewinded Shigaraki into infancy. Are you sure? All Might asked as took the baby in his arms, feeling a strange mix of emotions as he held the baby. That while being the tool of revenge of AFO, it was also the last remnants of his mentor's legacy. Yeah, I may be exhausted and running on fumes here, but as you can see, I am the only person around who has more than one way to disable AFO's quirks, Izuku said as his eyes glowed red. Izuku's hair started to gently rise. Erasure, I forgot about that, All Might said. That also explained why AFO failed to attack him with that oversized arm at that time, and why AFO lost control of himself while flying a couple of seconds ago. I hate the man that has this quirk, but the situation calls for the usage of anything that we had to put an end to this menace, and that means that I will even use this to win, Izuku said, and then All Might simply nodded at Izuku and took the baby away with him. I will try to return as fast as I can. Just hold on for a little, All Might said as he flew away as he was holding the now sleeping Tenko between his arms. He silently prayed in his mind for both Izuku and Murio's safety before he returned to the fray and hoped that today would be the day that AFO was done for good. AFO was starting to get annoyed at that interloper who was able to turn his quirks off in the worst moment possible. The agonizing pain that he had to endure when those healing quirks were disabled for a couple of seconds was ruining his mood, and he had decided to find that pest and get rid of it once and for all, but Murio was now doubled down in his aggression, and that prevented him to focus on trying to eliminate that unknown threat to him. Where is All Might? Did he run away like a coward? AFO said as both were trading blows, trying to get a rise out of Murio to make him slip up. Murio simply looked at the man and refused to reply to him. Izuku told him that he shouldn't give AFO words any attention and he should focus on beating him into the ground, a sentiment that the Vestiges inside of OFA shared. AFO enjoyed playing the role of a demon lord so much that he went the extra mile to make sure that his words and taunts were as hurtful as his fist, so denying him the satisfaction of acknowledging his words was a way to rile him up. and Murio needed to keep the heat on himself to allow Izuku to support him from a distance. Izuku was tired of constantly using his blood to do multiple things in quick succession in a low amount of time with no breaks. And even if he had super regeneration to prevent himself from bleeding to death and blood control to allow him to deal with the blood loose better, he still was exhausting his body to the point that his quirk was losing effectiveness. The only thing that he could do now was to use his quirk to create blood tendrils to attack AFO on the back by using Bakugo's quirk factor on his blood to detonate those tendrils to cause some damage and to stagger him, so Murio could get a free hit or two on the man. AFO was quite annoyed at Izuku's way of offering assistance to Murio, as he considered those kinds of underhanded tactics as something that only cowards would do. But considering how AFO considered those methods acceptable only if he was the one that used them, then it was clear that he disliked the fact that someone was not acting like a hero for him to squash with those cowardly means. AFO's patience was running thin alongside his stamina, and now he was being pushed into a corner, not by two individuals trying to fight him at the same time, but by one that was fighting him, while the other was just taking cheap shots at him in such a way that he had no time and way to retaliate at that other individual. "I had enough of this," AFO said as he decided to take a page of Yuii's school motto and powered through one of Izuku's long-range explosions and managed to grab Murio on a chokehold in a moment that Murio miscalculated his timing. "I have you now, you little SHD," AFO said that as he was now not only choking Murio with his hand, but also was trying to use AFO to steal OFA from Murio. Murio, to his credit, had enough willpower to resist the theft of OFA from him, but he was unable to use his permeation now, as OFA constantly trying to steal OFA could mean that he would give a chance to AFO to easily steal OFA if he used his quirk now. "This is much better," AFO said as he was seeing how Murio was losing consciousness. If AFO was unable to make Murio submit, then he would capture him alive and find a way to contain him so he could try to steal his quirk at a later date. "Not going in like this," Murio said, struggling valiantly as he tried to break free of that chokehold. But he was feeling how his consciousness was starting to fade away and was almost praying for a miracle. "You don't get to decide, T-Yug." AFO was opening his mouth to taunt Murio, but then he felt how something pierced one of his sides. It was Izuku's right arm covered with red ice that Izuku used as a makeshift shank. "What the?" AFO weakly said as he then felt how his quirk suddenly went haywire, and now AFO was being activated, as that red lighting that his quirk generated when he stole a quirk was covering Izuku's arm that was still piercing AFO's body. His consciousness started to fade for a couple of seconds, and when he was able to shake that feeling, he was inside the inner world inside his quirk, in which the vestiges of the quirks that he stole were residing. But for the first time in his life, he felt multiple presences inside his quirk that were familiar to him. AFO then moved around this inner world under his control and reached the location in which those presences were, and he was left speechless as he saw one of those presences in front of him. Yuichi, as Murio felt how AFO's hand stopped applying pressure to his neck. He suddenly felt the pull of OFA when he tried to focus on entering the inner world of that quirk, and then he found himself in an empty space that was bigger than the one that he was used to see when he entered OFA's inner world. The vestiges of the past wielders of OFA were there, but for some reason, Izuku and other strange figures were also as well in that empty space. "What is going on?" Murio asked as he tried to assimilate what he was seeing. "AFO and OFATHI are colliding now," Yuichi said. It appeared that Izuku's interference may have saved Murio from a fate worse than death, but it had also created a situation in which both quirks' boundaries were nearly non-existent. SHTMY Quirk had recognized AFO as a genetically compatible quirk to me, as AFO is technically my ancestor as he is Yuichi's twin, and that may have caused both OFA and AFO to be like this. Izuku said. The vestiges of OFA remembered how the first time that Izuku's quirk entered in contact with Murio went, and how OFA was almost forcefully dragged into Izuku's body, and only Izuku's determination allowed him to force OFA to stay in Murio's body, a thing that they considered a reverse of AFO's situation. And after the shock of that event, it became something that they could laugh about as the thought of someone having a quirk that could easily steal OFA from their host. But it never happened. Because the wielder of that quirk refused to steal it while AFO was unable to steal OFA no matter what he tried was almost ironic. So that means? Nana Shimura asked, grateful in a way that Izuku had found a way of saving her grandson from the fate that AFO imposed on them, but somewhat concerned at this situation. It means that the inner worlds of OFA and AFO now are bridged together and I am the one that created that bridge, Izuku said, realizing that maybe he should have decapitated AFO from a distance instead of getting closer to shank him from behind with his arm covered in ice. Maybe this is a blessing in disguise, and Tayutai said he was the sixth wilder of OFA and now a vestige inside of it as well. What? And how is that possible? Daigoro Banjo, the fight wielder of OFA, said, the inner world inside both OFA and AFO is not only a mental thing, but also a manifestation of the wielder's soul. If we manage to break AFO's spirit, then we may gain the upper hand. Haikid Shinomori, the fourth, said, that is easier said than done, but is not like we had other alternatives. Bruce, the third one, said, so we should try to sneak past AFO's vestige and then try to cause some chaos inside of him for as long as we are in this situation. Kido, the second one, said, then I guess that we need some quality prime bait to keep the big bad distracted, Izuku said, knowing that Yuichi was the one who could garner AFO's attention the best. I can manage that. My brother is definitely going to jump at the chance of seeing me, and with some luck, I can distract him long enough to give the time to do some damage here. Yuichi said, I'm not leaving you alone with that monster. Murio said. He saw how Izuku also nodded his head, and then he warned the rest that AFO was closing in, that they should get out of the way now before AFO reached the OFA's inner realm. Well, I guess that might as well reveal that secret to the man if it buys us some time, Izuku said to both Yuichi and Murio as the other vestiges entered the inner world of AFO in order to take down the other vestiges inside of him to weaken the villain just in case. Yuichi and then AFO decided to appear. Yuichi, AFO said as he saw that his younger brother was there, or what truly remained of him in this world. I would say that it's good to see you again, brother, but the last time we met each other, you sort of kind of killed me, Yuichi said, looking at the vestige of his older brother, who despite being a villain, he was still his brother. It was an accident. I was looking for you, AFO said with clear emotion in his voice. Yes, you did. You looked for me after you kept me locked up from the world as I was a possession that you refused to part ways with. But you did more than just look for me. You killed everyone that stood in your way as you blamed everyone else for the fact that I decided to escape when Kido and his group saved me from that cruel imprisonment that you forced upon me. Yuichi said, a little sad about doing this, because even if Yuichi considered AFO his brother, he wasn't going to ignore the sins of his brother. It was their fault. They stood in the way. AFO shouted, please don't lie to me. Even in those times, you had enough quirks to find me and drag me back to your side if you wanted to, regardless of how many people were in the way, but you put your ambition to be the demon lord in this world and decided to indulge in your anger over taking the easy option. The massacre that you caused to find me was done for yourself and your longing to be a demon lord, not because you were mad that they had taken me away. Yuichi said, seeing the way that his words caused some emotional distraught in AFO, but at this point, Yuichi was committed to putting this feud to an end. That not, AFO tried to say, but then he started to feel a sudden loss of power, and as he turned his back to return to his own inner world, he saw how the bridge that united both quirks now was blocked by Murio and a green-haired kid with red eyes. Sorry, but you aren't going to return to your own quirk right now, Murio said. AFO tried to call the power of some of his own quirks to get them out of the way, but he was feeling how the stored quirks that he had were suddenly going away. Sorry, dear granduncle, or something like that, but I am putting an end to this family feud once and for all, Izuku said. He saw how his words caused some confusion to AFO. AFO focused on that word, and Yuichi used that chance to pull that ace in the hole that they were saving. Yuichi did saw that his words were still able to hold some sway on his brother, and he was trying to stall him to allow the others to deal with the other vestiges inside AFO, but it was clear that his comrades were too successful in that regard, and then he had no choice but to throw that information about Izuku's lineage to buy some extra time. Yes, Izuku Midoriya is in fact my descendant. He carried not only my DNA, but the one of that woman that you killed the last when you killed Bruce and the others, the nurse that took care of me when I was too weak to stand after what that imprisonment left me weakened. We had a fling one time a couple of days before you killed me, and she ended up getting PRGNNT from that one encounter. That kid that she gave on adoption, that kid was my son. A part of me, AFO, heard those words, and then he let them sink in. He had been a long time ago, so close to reclaiming a part of his brother's legacy on this world, and part of what was his property, but he passed on that chance twice. The first time was when he decided to let that nurse's child live his life undisturbed. And the second was when he got near Izuku that day at the doctor's clinic as Izuku was getting tested for a quirk. The shock of now knowing that he had been really close to a part of his brother was strong enough to distract him for enough time to allow the vestiges of OFA to put down the only vestige inside AFO that was loyal to AFO. Yuichi saw with some sadness how the vestige of AFO was starting to break apart, as with the destruction of life force alongside the healing quirks that were keeping him alive. The injury that Izuku caused to AFO's side was lethal enough to make AFO perish for good. AFO was now only barely hanging alive as a vestige because Izuku's quirk was keeping him tethered into OFA's inner world as the death of his body was making his vestige disappear. The vestiges inside OFA returned quickly to OFA's inner world, and they saw how AFO was just crumbling to dust in front of them. "May you rest in peace, brother," Yuichi said, and then AFO's vestige crumbled to dust. Everyone there saw how the villain that had terrorized Japan once now was dead for good, but none of them thought that this was the end of AFO in a way. They felt in a way that the threat of AFO wasn't truly over, even if the man himself was now about to die. But they couldn't stay here and contemplate that fact. Izuku and Murio needed to return to the real world to deal with the aftermath. And as Izuku was now ending that force connection that AFO imposed on them, a small damaged genetic quirk factor on AFO dying body of unknown origin managed to be assimilated into Izuku's quirk. Back in the real world, Izuku pulled out his hand from AFO's side and then checked his pulse. AFO was dead now. "Is it over?" All Might said. He had reached the boys and saw how AFO's body was wildly emitting red lightning that kept both kids and AFO contained in one place. "Yeah, I hope so," Izuku said, looking at his arm that was now covered in blood, and then he used his quirk to burn that blood away. Izuku felt conflicted at the fact that he had helped to kill the man, but he knew that AFO had to be stopped. The words of the vestiges trying to take away the blame for killing AFO, as it was their actions that disabled all his healing quirks, were helping a little, but he in the end was the one that gave AFO that fatal blow. AFO may be dead now, but AFO still has minions that could cause some trouble for us. We need to be vigilant and bring them to justice," Murio said, looking at Izuku and feeling in a way that this was his fault. Both All Might and Murio were more or less mentally prepared to do the deed if needed, as they were more mature in an emotional way, and even if they knew that Izuku was willing to kill AFO, none of them wanted Izuku to deal with the aftermath of the act of killing someone, even if said killing was justified in a way. Yasufo's shadow is too long, and to fully erase it, we need to dismantle his organization piece by piece, no matter how much time we have to employ to do it," All Might said, also looking at Izuku with some concern. "Yes, we still have a lot to do," Izuku said, and then he created multiple tendrils of blood from his fingertips that incinerated AFO's corpse to ashes. None of them talked about what happened on the way back to the camp, but All Might told him that he would take the credit for killing AFO to keep his name clean, as heroes that kill people had a little of a stigma in the hero community, and All Might wanted to at least protect his dream to be a hero in his own terms by making sure that the public would never know about the deed that he needed to perform to save the world. Izuku simply accepted his words and moved over as much as he could from this event, but the fact that he killed AFO wasn't going to leave his mind for a long time in more ways than one. The next day after the event that now was publicly known as the Nagano incident came, and while the heroes won in the end, the amount of destruction and damage caused by the villains was quite apparent. AFO was dead, and All Might claimed to be responsible for the demise of that villain, a thing that damaged his reputation somewhat. But considering the damage that AFO and the League of Villains caused, A lot of those detractors and fence-sitters ended up accepting that All Might ended doing the right thing. Almost all the students of UA on the camp were returning to UA after the events of the previous day. Some were still upset at the fact that they had a traitor in their ranks, while others were still trying to unwind after the traumatic events that they endured the previous night. Yuga Aoyama was still in the camp, under the custody of the Pussycats as he waited for Sir Night-Eye and Ingenium to appear to not only conduct the interrogation, but also show that they held their part of the bargain by bringing his parents, who were being attacked in the moment that those sidekicks of Ingenium moved to check his house. AFO moved to get rid of that loose end, and when he decided that Aoyama had lost his usefulness and prepared something to get him killed, he also was going to kill his parents as well to prevent them from talking. When Ingenium's sidekicks reached the Aoyama's residence, they found out that a fight had started as one hero out of his costume intervened when he saw that a group of villains was attacking the house, and their intervention ended saving both Aoyama's parents and that hero's life. So with Aoyama's parents secured and with AFO dead, Aoyama started to reveal information about some of the connections that AFO had with certain individuals. Sir Night-Eye and Ingenium were concerned to hear that a well-reputed chairman of Jaku General Hospital, Daruma Ujiko, was in fact a collaborator of AFO and the one that was the creator of Nomus. When they tried to go to Jaku Hospital to apprehend the doctor in order to question him, they found out that he hadn't come to work today, and when they went to his home, they saw that he wasn't there anymore. The creator of the Nomus had escaped, and they had no idea where he had decided to go, as All Might was now leaving the baby Tenko with some trusted people, as he was going to talk with Nizu about what happened the previous day, and how his decision to keep the students there as bait in case the LOV decided to attack was the last straw for him and some other teachers. Izuku was now going back to the police department in Nagano, where Bakugo was locked up. Inside it, the looks of the heroes and police officers who had been somewhat injured but were still working saddened Izuku in a way. Izuku was sure that some police officers and heroes had died because of that Nomu attack in the whole prefecture, and with the news that a lot of the Nomus that were incapacitated were killed in the end, Izuku felt somewhat desolated. He now believed that he had a way to rewind those monsters back into humans, but it was not like he could blame the heroes and police officers for putting a lot of those Nomus out of their misery. That decision came in a moment in which people were fighting for their lives, or after the fight was over, and the emotions were still running hot. Izuku would have carved a bloody path on the streets with those Nomus entrails if his mom had been killed by one of them, so it was not like he could blame them for ending those Nomus lives during a moment of emotional distress. But Izuku had to push those thoughts aside. He was going to have one last talk with someone that never seen him as a person since they were kids. Someone who hated the fact that someone like him wanted to be a hero and refused to give up even when the world was telling him that it wasn't possible. Bakugo's memories and emotions that went through his mind as he was inside Tamura's Quirk showed him the context of Bakugo's hatred of his existence, and he came to at least validate Bakugo's opinion on the fact that Bakugo believed that Izuku looked down at him, because now he did look down at Bakugo as someone beneath him, and those feelings were something that Izuku was going to share with his childhood bully. So when he got near the cell in which Bakugo was being held, he saw that his parents were also there. Both Mitsuki Bakugo and Masaru Bakugo received the call that their son had been detained and locked up, and they wanted to talk to them about why he escaped home and joined the villains. The sound of his footsteps made both Bakugos look at him with some sadness in their eyes. Izuku, Mitsuki said, looking at the boy that she believed was once her son's friend, but was in fact Katsuki's favorite target of bullying. Ms. Bakugo, Mr. Bakugo, Izuku said, addressing them in a polite but distant manner. As much as Izuku knew that they weren't the worst influence that corrupted Bakugo until he became that deluded individual, it was also true that both Bakugos were not able to properly educate Bakugo or to make him see the error of his deluded views. So they were as guilty as the people of Aldera and his environment of turning Bakugo into who had become today. What is going to happen to him? Masaru asked, being somewhat surprised to see that the kid who was a gentle and cheerful child who wanted to be a hero despite the fact that he was quirkless now was a cold and distant hero. He will face trial, and considering that he violated the house arrest that was imposed on him and that he destroyed the place where my mother and I lived, then it's quite possible that he would be in jail for the rest of his life. Izuku said, He saw how his words made Mitsuki almost cry, but Izuku wasn't moved. "But there has to be something," Masaru tried to say, but Izuku shook his head. "I'm afraid not. The recordings of Aldera, the amount of property damage and injured civilians that he caused in the Tokyo incident, and the incident that he caused during the final exam in UA. That was what convinced Nizu to expel him with a black mark, already sealed his fate as someone who would spend his life in Tartarus for the rest of his life," Izuku said. He looked at them both, and while he saw how Mitsuki was now starting to cry and Masaru tried to console her, there was nothing that could be done for his situation aside from sharing the information about how Bakugo was technically kidnapped and coerced into joining the League of Villains, and that he was quirkless now. And that is what he decided to do in the end. Izuku walked away from the Bakugos and decided to discard his original plan of confronting Bakugo about his deluded idea that he had been looking down on him when he was still a quirkless kid. This feud needed to end now, and Izuku needed to get away from him to truly start healing. Nabu Island is an isolated and peaceful small island with a population of about 1,000 that lives in a tightly knit community. A place that is blessed with a warm climate that turns it into a perfect place for tourism all year long. The island is quite isolated from the rest of the country, and therefore far from almost any villainous activity aside from some scams directed at tourists. Life on the island is peaceful and idyllic, having been 30 years without any incident. For this reason, there are few assigned heroes there, and the few there are mainly dedicated to doing minor duties such as finding lost items, doing some odd jobs for the average citizen, and the occasional action of stomping any kind of minor crime in the area. Nabu Island is a peaceful place for those who want to live a quiet and peaceful life, but not all is as good as it looks. AFO did set his sights on the island a lot of years ago, and in fact, he was the one that stomped out the villain activity there for a reason. Nabu Island was a base of operations for himself in the past that he used to monitor the situation in Japan while keeping himself out of the public sight as he located the next wielder of OFA. But now, that base of operations has become the new lab of Yuii Shigaraki, as he now carried his duty of preparing the next body of AFO, so his MSTR would return to the land of the living. That new body was, in fact, one of the test subjects of a duplicate of AFO that Yuii considered he had more potential as a vessel of AFO than Shigaraki did, and thanks to Shigaraki's mental decline after explosion was given to him, Yuii managed to persuade AFO to give that boy a chance. 9 possessed a powerful quirk that unfortunately damaged his body to the point that it promised an early demise. 9 found out about AFO, and he accepted to subject himself to experimentation to create a replica of AFO, so he could find and steal a quirk that could save him from death. But the thing was that the strain that set a copy of AFO caused more strain on his body, and he would die even earlier than he expected. But now that 9 was offered a chance to survive by not only taking the original AFO, but also a cache of self-healing quirks that would prolong his life, then 9 accepted the new deal that was offered to him in order to further his agenda to create a perfect world for himself and his loyal friends. 9 wasn't that naive to think that AFO offered this deal out of the kindness of his heart, and 9 expected that AFO had something in mind to assert his demps regardless of 9's wishes. But he took this gamble in order to gain the time that he needed to make their ideal world a reality. He was now resting inside a healing tank as his body was starting to recover from the debilitation that he suffered from the strain of his quirks under the watchful eye of his friends Slice, Mummy, and Chimera. We have important news. Principal Nizu of UA had stepped down from his position as principal. There is no confirmation or comments on Nizu's part, but there are rumors that said action is the result of the recent revelations of a spy of the now defunct League of Villains being a student of the hero course, and how Nizu was unable to catch that spy before the events of the Nagano's incident, in which the summer camp that was being done in the mountains in which Pussycats had their agency located was celebrated and was attacked by multiple villains and Nomus at the same time that the whole prefecture of Nagano. A news anchor said. It appeared that Aoyama had survived, Garaki said. He was surprised to hear that news, as he expected that the brat who was that confident in his chance to kill students of the hero course with a gun was at least capable of doing his job after he showed that he was a competent gunman with it. But it appears that the brat fumbled the killing shot. The other 3 were not really concerned about the news, as they were more worried about 9's condition than hearing how Nizu stopped being UA's principal. But Garaki was concerned in a way. For all Nizu's supposed intelligence, the rat lacked the ability to understand humans and their emotions, and he let his resentment against humanity partially drive his thoughts and decisions. If Nizu's replacement as a principal was more capable in the emotional spectrum than Nizu, then it could be a problem for their operations, but they would cross that bridge when the time comes. Their priority now was to get AFO's new body ready and to start gathering new followers, as Garaki knew that Aoyama's betrayal could mean that some of their agents would be compromised and they needed new blood in their organization. Garaki had a place in mind to amass new subordinates, but until 9 was fully healed up, their assault on Daika City in order to defeat and absorb the Meta Liberation Army would have to wait. "Welcome home," Inko said. She had seen how Izuku had returned to their new residence after he called her to inform her that he was going to stay in Nagano for heroic business, and then she started to get somewhat worried when she saw the news this morning. "Thank you, Mom. This whole week has been somewhat stressful," Izuku said. "I can tell," Inko replied. "AFO is death, but there is something that bugs me a little," Izuku said. His mother was informed about her ancestry and how she was related to a supervillain. So to hear that said villainous ancestor was out of the way was somewhat good to hear, but she was worried when Izuku told him that something was bugging him. "And what is that?" "The quirk that AFO had, it was an artificial one," Izuku said. One of the things that his quirk allowed him to do was to discern between natural quirks and artificial ones. So considering that he knew firsthand what an artificial quirk was thanks to super regeneration and shock absorption, then he was sure that the All For One that AFO had wasn't a natural quirk. And what is that supposed to mean? That there is someone that had the original AFO stored somewhere. And since a quirk in a way contains a vestige of AFO, then there is still a chance that AFO could return in a new body, Izuku said. He saw his mom's face of concern, and then she decided to talk. "And All Might and those heroes in the know about AFO know this?" Inko asked. "Of course. I did told All Might and Murio about that before we returned to the Pussycats, and Sir Night Eye was informed a couple of hours later," Izuku said. "So this means that this isn't over yet," Inko said. "Unfortunately. But I promise that I will find a way to put an end to this, so we can live free from that looming shadow, Mom," Izuku said while trying to cheer his mom. Izuku saw how his mother tried to not let that info upset her, and took Izuku at his word. Both mother and son then spent the day enjoying the summer break, as Inko wanted to make Izuku's favorite dish to celebrate the fact that he was starting to be more popular now in the news after his heroism and act of healing people was starting to gather people attention, and Izuku felt something warm during all those moments of peace and quiet of a normal life that he had while outside of heroics. There was a sense of expectancy in the public after the news of Nizu's decision to step down about what would be the future of UA as an institution, as the scandals that UA had faced during the beginning of this school year ended up being one of the catalysts for a massive change in UA's faculty that started with Eraserhead's firing after an undisclosed incident, which the only knowledge that the public was afforded to know was that said firing was the result of the events that ended with Bakugo's expulsion. The HPSC was now eager to get their hands on you, now that Nizu was out of the way. And while they weren't able to directly appoint a new principal in that school thanks to Nizu's decision to make the process of selection an affair that was meticulously designed to not allow them any voice or presence in that affair, they could still try to subtly coerce the new principal to force you to fall in line with the HPSC to try to salvage the reputation of UA as the best hero school in the whole world. But that wasn't the only issue that the HPSC wanted to tackle now. There was a rising star that came from the most unexpected place from their point of view, and that was Izuku Midoriya. That boy was breaking through the mold that they imposed on those who wanted to be heroes, and while some of the most pragmatic individuals in the higher positions on the HPSC considered that Izuku could be a potential substitute for Hawks as one of their operatives with the way that he did things and his heroic track record, the mere fact that he possessed really strong connections to influential people in the hero business and had already gained an international reputation thanks to the support that he gave to All Might during the island incident, then they had no choice but to leave him be. The fact that Izuku showed a thinly veiled contempt for them and their methods, even if he was willing to rely on them, like when he wanted to settle the incident that Eraserhead caused in UA by reporting it to them so they could deal with Eraserhead for him, let them knew that Izuku was starting to become the worst kind of hero from their point of view. The way society was structured and how heroism and flashy quirks were intertwined was, in a way, a tool to control public opinion and to influence the younger heroes into being more malleable and willing to roll with how things were. But Izuku wasn't like that. Izuku had shown that despite having now the popularity and pull of a hero on the top 10 charts of Japan, with all the messes that he had found himself involved in, and how he had lent All Might support multiple times, he was someone who acted more like an underground hero. Izuku didn't share the uniform that other heroes had, choosing formal clothing over a flashy costume to do his job, and it also appeared that he was working with some other heroes to deal with investigations, or even healing those that needed healing, granting him the chance to build connections and contacts in the whole country despite not acting like a fame-seeking hero that the HPSC preferred that all heroes in Japan were, as they were easy to keep under a leash. The HPSC hated people who used their heads to think about what heroism was about over being a cog in the machine that was the hero industry, as they considered that people too difficult to manipulate. And while in the past they had people like Lady Nagano to deal with those kinds of people when they started to become a real problem for them, something told them that trying to get rid of him would be not worthy at all. They needed to find a way to keep Izuku, if not under control, in a position in which he wouldn't turn against them. But since Izuku was also the son of Hisashi Midoriya, a man who worked as a representative of Japan in the WHA, then they knew that one single misstep could backfire and destroy them. As the WHA had shown itself willing to purge the corruption of any HPSC of any country affiliated to them in order to try to keep the image of heroism clean. So they needed to find something that they could use while also making sure to not get any of those important people who were paying attention to Izuku involved, as that would spell their doom. But that was one of those things that the HPSC had now in their agenda alongside other issues and topics that they needed to deal with now, like trying to do some damage control after Katsuki Bakugo's trial. Katsuki Bakugo had been sentenced to imprisonment in a jail for low-level villains instead of Tartarus, as the revelation that he had been rendered quirkless by the now-defunct AFO, and he was kidnapped instead of having abandoned his house. When he disappeared made the judge have some leniency on the now-useless Bakugo that changed his life sentence on Tartarus to up to 10 years in a jail for low-level villains, with the possibility of parole in the future if he showed good behavior. But that was not the only trial that concerned them. The faculty of the now-closed Aldera was being investigated for supposed ties to a terrorist organization that was still alive even after the incarceration of their founder years ago. The Meta Liberation Army was still alive, and the HPSC found evidence of their continued existence, and that they were planning something. The HPSC were now thinking about what to do to stop them, and they decided to try to insert a spy on their organization to try to gather info on them to destroy them before they managed to pull a similar stunt that the LOV and AFO did in the past months. Even if they now managed to put them to an end, the public perception of them took some damage, and they needed to keep the public thinking that they were back on track to prevent people from thinking that they were useless. So if they needed to do their supposed jobs to keep their power, then that was what is going to happen a week after the incident in Nagano, and after some of the scandal that transpired with the removal of Nizu as a principal of UA out of his own volition, and that a spy of the villains was found and was dealt with by the law after a deal was done to keep his and his family away from the public eye. Izuku Midoriya was back at the Idodin agency. He was still a teenager spending his summer like a normal kid who worked part-time to gain some spending money if one was willing to overlook that he was even then doing hero work. So returning to the menial tasks of a part-timer that did simple tasks after the whole week of dealing with villains and Nomus was now his way of relaxing. Izuku, what do you fell? Himiko asked. Both talked about their past with each other, and she knew about Bakugo's bullying of him. And when she heard that Bakugo ended up in jail, she wanted to know how Izuku felt. I don't really know. I mean, I am more or less happy, but there are still some words that I decided to keep even if I wanted to tell him to his face. But the only thing I can do now is to live my life and move on from this mess. I can't allow him to be a constant in my life after I managed to push him out of my life. Izuku said, I know that you have told me that a lot of times, but I can see that it is easier to say than to do that. Himiko said, Yet it is far easier to say that when you are seeing a situation and dealing with it from an outsider's point of view while being emotionally unattached. The moment that you are emotionally invested in that kind of situation, the moment that the logical approach becomes more difficult to take, Izuku admitted. You may be right, but you are doing that despite the difficulty of it. Himiko said as she looked at Izuku. I didn't want to get on Bakugo's face to tell him that all those childhood delusions of his that made him believe that I was constantly looking down at him were now true, but the moment I saw his parents there as they were desolated at the thought of Bakugo's now ruined future, I felt that it was enough. And I know that Bakugo would be the kind of BSTRD that would like to kick someone when they are down, and that he would have no mercy with someone that is suffering. But I felt that enough was enough and decided to stay away from him. Izuku said. He may felt that putting down Bakugo in front of his parents was too cruel for them, and decided to spare them from that spectacle. I see, I talk so much of wanting to put the past behind me and move forward, but unless I truly make an effort to stay away from Bakugo and to avoid a situation that would give me a reason to be near him, then I would be still caught on my own past. I have to be better than that, Izuku said. Well, you are technically better than him now. You are a hero, and he is in jail, Himiko said in order to cheer him up. You are right, Izuku said. Both Himiko and he then decided to focus on their job for the day, before Izuku decided to talk with Ingenium about one thing that he wanted to do, but he needed some extra pair of hands for that to happen. In Might Tower, inside a private office, a group of particular heroes that had some connections with Izuku were there to discuss a particular issue that Izuku wanted to talk about after he discovered a way of turning the Nomus back into humans. Thank you people for indulging me with this particular request. I know that we are all busy with our duties as heroes with things like investigations, patrols, and other heroic duties, but I want some help to deal with the surviving Nomus that were captured during the incident in Nagano, and those that were rescued from the secret labs all around Japan that Aoyama revealed to us as part of his deal, Izuku said. He looked at those who were there. All Might, Sir Nightai, Ingenium, and Murio were there. Sure, Murio was still a student of the hero course, but since not only did he have OFA, but also was in the last year of the hero course, then might as well let him be part of this. Well, I won't lie to you. I am interested to see how Rewind Quirk works outside of the Quirk erasing bullets, but I would like to know how you managed to undo the process of nomification. Sir Nightai said. He had been one of the few heroes that wasn't involved with the fight in Nagano, as multiple smaller villain attacks in other important cities were meant to keep the heroes from reaching Nagano to give some kind of support. So whatever plan AFO had could be undisturbed failed, because Izuku had the foresight to ask both All Might and Murio to be in the area in case of a potential attack. Sir Nightai was busy alongside Ingenium managing other villain activities, and it was he who passed Izuku's words to Ingenium, so he could fetch Aoyama's parents. Well, Murio here saw how turned back Bakugo from the Nomu that he was turned into a human, and All Might and Murio can say to you what happened with Tomuno Tenko Shimura when I rewinded him back into a baby, but the simple way to explain how rewind works is that it just returns a person's body to a point in their past with 100% accuracy. It is not healing, as rewind can set your body into an injured state if you were injured in the past, so I can turn the Nomus back into humans, but I need to spend a lot of blood to do that. And I'm sure as hell that there's a lot of logistics that I am not seeing that I need to get figured out, so this little project of mine could be feasible. Izuku said, I can see that, so you need our help. Is that what you were asking? Sir Nightai said, more or less. I can, on my own, restore those Nomus that are contained in jail cells back into humans. But I am sure that it wouldn't be the only thing that it needs to be done. For all I know, some of those individuals could have been declared legally dead and may had no family to return to. So, I really need people who could help me to figure out what to do with them. Izuku said. All Might looked at Izuku and realized that he may have a point. Even if Izuku returned those Nomus back to human, the world had moved without them after they were turned into those abominations, and the chances of being something for them after they were back into being humans were pretty slim. I'm willing to cooperate, young Midoriya. Even if we manage to defeat AFO, as long as we don't work to correct the wrongs that he committed, then we can't say that we had put an end to AFO and his reign of terror. All Might said. Murio looked at All Might and then looked at Izuku. Those Nomus are victims as much as those that had been hurt by AFO, and even if some of them were villains, they didn't deserve to end like this. So count me in. Murio said, if you need the support of the I-10 group to do this, then you can count on us. Midoriya? Ingenium said, I am afraid that I can't give too much help as I am still dealing with my own case with the Quirk erasing bullets, but if there is something that I can do, I will try my best to help, I can promise. Sir Nightai said, don't worry, any kind of help is appreciated. Izuku said, and after knowing that he had the backing of both All Might and Ingenium, Izuku managed to draft what would be his plan to help those remaining Nomus that were now under custody. Izuku may had no hand in their fate and had no reason to help them, but since he was related to AFO, he felt that he was somewhat obligated to fix the damage that AFO had caused, and since he was able to do something about those Nomus, then he was going to try to save them. There were some details that were eluding him as he was still a kid in high school, even if he was a hero, but since he knew adults that he could rely upon in case he needed, then he was confident that he could make things right for those individuals. This was in a way what being a hero meant to him. The Central Hospital in Tokyo was the place where the Nomus that had been captured during Nagano's incident, and those that were rescued from all those Noma factories hidden in Japan were relocated as the HPSC wanted to study those Nomus to find ways to return them to normal, or if not, to try to see if they could make any use out of them. But it also was the place in which All Might and the other heroes that joined Izuku's efforts decided to intervene to save those remaining Nomus. Izuku may be popular, his name is now almost in everyone's mouth because he is a hero despite being so young, and the events that he has gotten himself involved in make people pay attention to him. However, he lacked the kind of pull that Izuku needed to put this kind of operation in place, which is why Izuku ended up burying the hatchet with All Might and making peace with the man all those months ago. All Might did have contact with the police and enough reputation to do what Izuku needed to do. So he let All Might deal with the gathering of people like detectives and police officers to find out about the identities and the possibility of finding their relatives, and the whole convincing the whole hospital to let them deal with the Nomus that they were studying. Ingenium and some of his sidekicks were there to help with the security in case that a Nomu became hostile, and to help the police in whatever task that was related to moving the Nomus to whatever place they needed to go after being restored back into human. Murio was also there helping the other heroes, even if he technically was not a hero yet, and could spend this day doing normal things instead of taking part in this. In Izuku, he was there to use his quirk to try to rewind as many Nomus as he could, and he pretty much bought up to 2 boxes full of those blood supplements because Izuku knew that he wasn't going to heal up to 750 Nomus that they were keeping there with no breaks. The hospital kept the Nomus in an underground area, away from the people for security reasons. Young Midoriya, if you don't think that you could rewind all those Nomus in one day, then don't force yourself. Pushing yourself to the limit and exhausting yourself is not going to help. All Might said, talking to Izuku before he started to heal the first Nomu that they reached. The Nomu was now sedated and tied up to a hospital bed, unaware of its surroundings. I know, but I don't want to waste the time of those who came to help by taking more time than I need to, Izuku said, taking a deep breath as tendrils of blood emerged from his fingertips and pierced one of the Nomu's arms. All Might, Ingenium, and some of Ingenium's sidekicks saw how that Nomu was now glowing with a red light as its body suddenly started to change into a more human shape. After a while, that Nomu was back into a human form, who was an average Japanese woman with neon pink hair. Whoa! This ice incredible. How is he able to do that? Izuku heard the voices of some heroes and some of the scientists that were there who took a step back and left him to do his thing. Then, a man took a small blood sample from the woman to check her DNA, to see if they could find who she was, and then a couple of police officers and some of Ingenium's sidekicks got to work to locate whatever was left of that woman's past life. 5 liters, Izuku said, feeling somewhat excited. What? Ingenium said. 5 liters of blood were needed to rewind her back into human, Izuku said. Those words did reach All Might and the others, and they realized that the price for Izuku to fix a Nomu back into a human was quite steep. Even if All Might and Ingenium knew that Izuku was able to endure it, and that he was able to recover that blood faster than a normal person, they knew that Izuku was almost putting his own life in the line to save those people. Do you need some time to rest? All Might asked. A little bit, Izuku said, and then he took a seat on a chair nearby, taking one of those supplements to speed up a little that process. He needed up to 5 minutes of rest before rewinding those Nomus back to human, and it was clear to the people gathered there that this was going to take more than one day by the looks of it, as Izuku had to stop for real after 8 hours. After those 8 hours, everyone decided to call it quits for the day, and Izuku had no choice but to stop as well. He had spent up to 8 hours doing his best to rewind as many Nomus as possible, And while Izuku found out that his estimation of 3-5 liters of blood wasn't a universal thing, as some Nomus were able to be returned back to human with less blood, Izuku still had to take some rest between rewinding, as Izuku still was trying to MSTR this particular quirk, and that lack of mastery was making him to not be as fast as he wanted to be. In the end, on the first day of this particular project of his, Izuku managed to rewind up to 120 Nomus back to human. The police and the heroes worked as fast as they could, and while they managed to find the relatives of some of those Nomus when they were returned back to human, some of those Nomus had no such luck. AFO had a good idea in a way when he searched potential victims to turn into Nomus, as he tended to find either low-level villains that won't be missed or those that were living alone with no relatives. But between each villain and orphan that were turned into a Nomu, there was someone that had a family that Izuku suspected that were kidnapped and turned into Nomus because they had quirks that AFO coveted. All Might promised him that he would find a way to help those who had no way to return to a normal life, even if a lot of them were criminals. But Izuku knew that this was going to be a bureaucratic headache to deal with. The only thing that Izuku could do was to rewind those people back into human. And considering that he had gotten some practice with Rewind today, then maybe Izuku would manage to rewind those Nomus back into humans before the end of the summer 2 weeks. The whole operation to restore those Nomus back to human took 2 weeks, as All Might decided to dedicate the next day after Izuku managed to rewind as many Nomus as possible to try to find a way to deal with the legal situation of those now rewinded humans. And even if All Might was the #1 hero in the world and people listened to him, the laws existed for a reason, and a lot of paperwork was needed to be done. Izuku may wanted to protest about forcing him to stop for a day, but All Might told him that he should rest a whole day before trying to rewind more Nomus, as they were concerned that he could put his life at risk after spending so much blood in that short amount of time. So he had no choice but to listen to the man, as this whole thing was technically his show, as he was the one that gathered all those people. Some days, Izuku, unfortunately, didn't manage to break through the 2-digit barrier, as some of that Nomus had been Nomus for a long time. And others, he managed to almost reach the up to 150. His advance on the process of rewinding the Nomus was too uneven to allow All Might and the others to formalize the situation of those Nomus when he rewinded them back to human on a timely fashion, which made the whole thing to take that much time. But now Izuku was done with the whole rewinding those Nomus back into human, even if the HPSC were somewhat miffed at the fact that Izuku managed to reverse the process of nomification for some reason. The summer vacation was over, and now it was time to return to UA to continue his education there. But it appeared that some changes had occurred there after Nisa's departure as the principal of UA. The infamous freestyle education that Nisa boasted that made the hero course that famous was now out of the question, and now the hero course of UA was going to follow the standard way to teach students in the country. The new principal of UA, Endeavor, who had been chosen by the board in UA after discarding the other options that were on a list that Nisa left behind as a potential successor after he was forced to resign. One of those options was Izuku himself, who was promptly discarded, as not only Izuku was still a student, but also he lacked the license as a teacher or the experience to perform as a principal despite having a hero license. And then it was All Might, who politely declined after he admitted that his lack of experience was going to make him not be a good choice as the principal of UA. Endeavor did surprisingly accepted to take that spot, but it wasn't because he had a passion for teaching. This was the price to pay for him to be kept as a hero after the HPSC and himself discovered that the pyromaniac that kickstarted the Tokyo incident and was found dead after the incident was in fact his now deceased son, Tuya Todoroki. Tuya not only survived what they had believed was his first death, but he had become a serial killer and an arsonist before the incident in Tokyo that cost him his life for good, and if that information became public, then his career was over for good. The HPSC decided to keep that information out of the public knowledge in exchange for having him work with them in their interests. And now that an opportunity arose for the HPSC to stake their claim inside UA, they cashed in that favor and forced Endeavor to accept that spot as the next principal of UA after Nizu. That also had the benefit of finding a way to keep Izuku under some form of surveillance, as they now had a foothold inside UA from which they could operate. They needed to be discreet about it, but as long as they managed to keep tabs on Izuku from a safe distance, then they could work with that. Izuku's decision to rely on All Might and some of those heroes that he knew to take away from them whatever chance of finding any use for those nomus was a red flag for them. As Izuku showed that he was not only resourceful, but willing to use his contacts and resources to get what he needed in case that he was unable to procure that for himself while not relying on the HPSC. They needed to keep tabs on him and to find a weak spot of his to get him to comply with them. But the problem was that said weak spot was heavily protected by the WHA, and the last thing they needed was from the WHA to get on their case. For the time being, the HPSC was willing to content themselves with this victory against Nizu, and they would take advantage of the situation to their benefit. And one of those things would be to try to push forward their initiative of pulling more kids on the streets with a temporal hero license, as the incident in Nagano had made the public to ask for more security on the streets, and the HPSC saw an opportunity there. The provisional hero license exam was coming soon, and they believed that loosening the requirements a little on that exam to have more students on the street would help to quell the public unrest. There were some smaller concerns about opening the floodgates, but they believed that the immediate benefit of having multiple students who were still in the hero course was worth the potential risk of giving the provisional license to someone underqualified. They needed an immediate solution, and they believed that it was the path to take. So with that in mind, the HPSC ordered Endeavor to push the students of the first year of the hero course to take that exam, even if some of those kids weren't ready yet for it. The students of Class 1A in particular had powerful and flashy quirks, even if they had a bad reputation thanks to their poor performance during the sports festival, and they hoped that some real work on the ground would help those kids get their footing back, because it would be a shame that some kids with flashy quirks failed to become heroes. And since those kids passed the entrance exam of UA, then those kids had to show that they were a cut about the rest so they could start to fix you. Damaged reputation. The HPSC was getting more ambitious now that they had managed to score a massive victory against someone who had been an obstacle in their plans, but only time would tell if their actions would pay off. Thank you for joining us on this journey through What If Deku Had Blood Manipulation Quirk. We hope you found it as captivating as we did. A big thank you to Judas Magnus, 1994, for creating such an engaging story. Don't forget to visit their profile on archiveofourown.org for more fantastic works. The link is in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Zenin Fanfics for more intriguing explorations into fanfiction and fantasy. Your support helps us create more content like this, and we love hearing your thoughts and suggestions in the comment section. See you soon in the next video.